The phone recording my fiancé played for me in my own kitchen was 84 seconds long. It cost 84 seconds for my mother to burn down my career, my engagement, and my life. I stood barefoot on the cold tile, listening to her tell his mother that I owed $150,000 to underground Vegas bookies. She cried on the track, a perfect, trembling performance about my tragic gambling addiction. She told his old money Boston family she was protecting them. What she did not know was that my fiancé was sitting on the velvet sofa right next to his mother when the call came through. And what she forgot was that in Nevada, an auditor with a gambling addiction does not just lose a fiancé, she loses her state regulatory license. By morning, I would be professionally dead. Welcome back to Morning Revenge, where we untangle the webs our families weave. My name is Verity. I am 29, and I audit casino financials in Las Vegas. Drop a comment with your age and where you are listening from tonight, because if you have ever been the daughter whose achievements meant nothing compared to the golden sun, this audit belongs to you. The knock at my door had come at 11:15 on a Tuesday. The neon glow from the Strip cast long, unnatural shadows across my living room floor. I had spent the past 9 hours tracing laundered capital through shell corporations for the Bellagio Compliance Department. My eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets. When the intercom buzzed, my hand hovered over the security release button. Connor was supposed to be in Boston until Thursday. I pulled the heavy wooden door open. He stood in the hallway wearing a tailored charcoal overcoat that carried the faint scent of aviation fuel and cold rain. The Wentworth family practically owned Beacon Hill, and Connor moved through the world with the unshakable posture of generational wealth. Tonight, his jaw was locked tight. He did not step forward to kiss me. He did not smile. He walked past me into the kitchen and set his phone face up on the granite island. He tapped the screen. My mother's voice filled the quiet space between us. I did not know who else to turn to. Thomas and I are beside ourselves. I stopped breathing. The air in my condo suddenly felt thin. Connor kept his dark eyes fixed on my face, watching my pupils scanning for the micro-expressions that betray a lie. We are trying to protect Connor. My mother's voice trembled through the tiny speaker. We really are. But Verity has a sickness. It started small, but she is into the underground sports books for $150,000. She is marrying Connor to access the Wentworth trusts. She thinks Boston money will erase Nevada debts. My fingertips went numb. I gripped the edge of the granite counter so hard my knuckles turned white. My parents had always favored my younger brother, Blake. They practically worshipped his Ivy League medical residency, flying first class to his white coat ceremonies and paying for his Michelin star dinners. Meanwhile, they treated my dual degrees in law and finance like a trivial hobby. They called my regulatory work glorified bookkeeping. But this was different. This was a targeted execution. I see, Victoria Wentworth's recorded voice replied, smooth and impenetrable as a bank vault. And who else is aware of this? We had to do the right thing, my mother sniffled. Thomas made an anonymous report to the Nevada Gaming Control Board tonight. For her own good, we thought you should know before the engagement party on Saturday. The recording ended. The silence in my kitchen was deafening. I looked at Connor. His expression was a flawless mask of East Coast pragmatism. He was a man raised in boardrooms, trained to dissect hostile takeovers and mitigate liability. Right now, he was evaluating the woman he was supposed to marry. They reported me to the state, I whispered. My throat felt like sandpaper. Connor unbuttoned his overcoat. My mother requested an emergency meeting with our estate attorneys tomorrow morning. She views you as a severe risk. If they submitted an anonymous tip to the board, my corporate badges will be deactivated by 8 o'clock tomorrow, I said, tracing the cold seam of the countertop. A gambling debt is a statutory violation for a financial auditor. The state will freeze my accounts. They will launch an immediate investigation. I will lose my credentials. Connor stepped closer. The overhead lights caught the sharp angle of his cheekbones. Is there a $150,000 debt, Verity? I met his gaze directly. I did not blink. No. He held my stare for 3 long seconds. The tension stretched tight, vibrating like a wire about to snap. Then the rigid set of his shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. Then they just handed the state a loaded gun, Connor said evenly, and they pointed it directly at your life. I turned away, bracing my hands against the sink. The sheer calculation of it made my stomach pitch. My mother did not make that call in a panic. She orchestrated it. She waited until 2 days before the engagement party, maximizing the social humiliation. She wanted Victoria Wentworth to panic and throw money at the problem. She wanted the Wentworth lawyers to draft a quiet settlement to make the scandalous Richard family disappear. But why? I opened the cabinet and pulled down a glass, focusing on the simple physical action to keep my hands from shaking. I filled it with tap water and drank it in one breath. Connor leaned against the island, crossing his arms. My family respects evidence verity. We do not respond to hysterics. My mother did not cancel the engagement party. She told me to get on my jet, fly to Nevada, and secure the perimeter. I set the glass down. Secure the perimeter.
"We are going to audit your family," he said. The tone of his voice left no room for debate. "If your mother is fabricating a 6-figure debt to extort my family, there is a paper trail. People who lie about money always leave a trail. You are the best financial investigator in this city. Prove it." The panic that had been expanding in my chest stopped. The fear receded, replaced by a cold, familiar clarity. The numbers never lie. I walked over to the hallway closet and pulled out my laptop bag. I unzipped the leather casing and set my encrypted workstation on the dining table. "My personal banking access will be suspended as soon as the state processes the tip," I told him, booting up the machine. "But I have offshore tracking software and backdoor access to the public county ledgers. If my parents are moving money or hiding debt, I will find it." I typed my password, the rhythmic clatter of the keys filling the room. My parents thought they could weaponize my profession against me. They thought calling me a gambling addict in Las Vegas would make me run away and hide in shame. They forgot that an auditor is trained to dig up buried bodies, and I was about to dig up theirs. The morning sun over the Nevada desert was bright and unforgiving, casting harsh angles across the Bellagio employee parking garage. I parked my car on the 4th level at 7:45, 15 minutes ahead of my scheduled shift. My hands gripped the steering wheel. I took a slow, measured breath, letting the chilled air conditioning calm the lingering adrenaline from the night before. I smoothed the lapels of my navy blazer, picked up my briefcase, and walked toward the corporate elevators. The employee entrance buzzed with the usual morning shift change. Dealers in crisp uniforms, pit bosses carrying clipboards, and executives murmuring into earpieces moved through the security checkpoints. I stepped up to the executive turnstile and tapped my corporate badge against the scanner. A flat mechanical tone chimed. A red light flashed across the digital reader. The metal gate remained locked. I tapped the card a second time. The red light flashed again. In the Nevada gaming industry, a deactivated badge at 8 in the morning never means a software glitch. It means you are a liability. A heavy hand rested on my shoulder before I could pull my badge back. I turned to find 2 uniformed security officers flanking me. They did not smile. They did not offer a morning greeting. The taller officer gestured toward a side corridor reserved for escorted dismissals. "Miss Richard," the officer said, keeping his voice low enough to avoid a scene, but firm enough to command compliance. "We need you to come with us." I felt the eyes of my colleagues burning into the back of my neck as I walked away from the turnstiles. I had spent 5 years earning that specific clearance level. 5 years of passing FBI background checks, polygraphs, and exhaustive financial screenings to become a senior casino financial auditor. My parents used to mock the rigorous process at holiday dinners. They often pointed out that my younger brother Blake never had to submit his bank statements just to secure his medical residency in Boston. They treated my regulatory license like a plastic hall pass, a trivial hoop I jumped through for a meaningless job.
Yet they knew enough about my industry to understand that an anonymous tip about a gambling debt would trigger an automatic, immediate lockdown of my credentials. The officers escorted me down a sterile hallway and opened the door to a windowless human resources room. The air inside smelled of ozone from the copy machine and stale coffee. Marcus Thorne, the director of corporate compliance, sat behind a metal table. He had a manila folder positioned squarely in front of him. "Take a seat, Verity," Marcus said. He did not look up right away. He kept his eyes fixed on the open folder. I sat down, keeping my spine straight. I placed my hands flat on my thighs under the table, pressing my palms into the fabric of my trousers to hide the faint tremor in my fingers. We received a notice from the Nevada Gaming Control Board at 6 this morning. Marcus began lacing his fingers together. An anonymous report was filed overnight. It alleges you have accumulated a 6-figure debt with unlicensed sportsbooks. I stared at the knot in his tie. I have never placed a sports bet in my life, Marcus. You have my audit history. You have my continuous monitoring reports. You know the protocol, Verity, he replied, his tone devoid of empathy. This is not a debate about your character. Under state gaming regulations, any auditor flagged for illicit gambling activity must be immediately suspended, pending a formal state investigation. Your access to the Bellagio servers is revoked. Your corporate devices must be surrendered. He slid a single sheet of paper across the metal table. It was a formal notice of temporary suspension. The state seal of Nevada was printed at the top in stark black ink. The psychological weight of the paper pressed down on my chest. This was not a petty argument over holiday plans. My parents had weaponized my specific geographic and professional reality. They understood that in the hyper-regulated corporate landscape of Las Vegas, the mere accusation of financial compromise was enough to ruin a career. They wanted to strip away my independence, leaving me terrified, unemployed, and desperate enough to beg the Wentworth family for a financial rescue. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out my corporate laptop and my secondary secure phone, and placed them on the table. I did not argue. Arguing with a compliance officer is like arguing with a calculator. I stood up, gave Marcus a brief nod, and turned toward the door. The walk back to my car felt like moving through water. The bright morning sun now felt blinding. I unlocked my door, sat in the driver's seat, and let the quiet of the enclosed cabin wash over me. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel. For 10 seconds, I allowed myself to feel the profound betrayal. My mother and father had engineered a lie to orchestrate my professional execution. Then the 10 seconds were up. I lifted my head. The victim retreated, and the auditor took the wheel. If my parents wanted a forensic war, I would give them one. When I unlocked the door to my condo, the smell of dark roast coffee filled the entryway. Connor had transformed my dining room into a war room. He had cleared away the decorative centerpieces. His encrypted laptop sat open on the table, flanked by 3 yellow legal pads and a stack of printed banking regulations he had sourced overnight. He looked up as I closed the door. He read the outcome in the rigid line of my shoulders. "Suspension?" he asked. "Pending a state investigation," I confirmed, dropping my empty briefcase by the door. I surrendered my devices. I am locked out of the corporate network. Connor poured a cup of coffee and slid it across the dining table toward the empty chair beside him. He did not offer empty platitudes. He did not tell me everything would be fine. He brought his family's East Coast legal pragmatism directly into my Nevada desert. "Sit down," Connor instructed, uncapping a black fountain pen. "My mother has briefed our estate attorneys in Boston. They are placing a protective hold on all Wentworth Trust assets to ensure your parents cannot attempt a blind draw. Now we build our counter-offensive." I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic mug. They use the state to blindfold me. Without my corporate clearances, I cannot run standard background traces on their accounts. "We do not need your corporate clearances," Connor said, his dark eyes locking onto mine. "We need to shift our perspective. You are looking at them as your mother and father. You are expecting familial logic. Stop. From this moment forward, Thomas and Diane Richard are a hostile corporate entity engaged in an illegal leveraged buyout. They are attempting to extort my family by holding your reputation hostage. We treat them exactly the same way my family treats a hostile takeover. We audit them into the ground. He pushed a fresh legal pad across the table. Write down every bank they use, every mortgage broker they have ever mentioned, every credit card company you can remember them complaining about. I picked up a pen. I wrote down the name of their local credit union. I wrote down the national bank that held the mortgage on their suburban house. As I listed the financial institutions, a cold realization crept over my skin. I need to check my personal accounts, I said, reaching for my personal cell phone. The state moves fast when they suspect illicit gambling. I opened my banking application and tapped my thumb against the biometric sensor. The loading screen spun for 3 seconds before a gray dialog box appeared. Account frozen. Please contact your branch administrator regarding a regulatory hold. I set the phone down. The screen reflected the harsh overhead light. The state froze my checking and savings accounts. My parents timed this perfectly. I have no access to my own capital. I cannot hire a private investigator. I cannot wire retainer fees to a defense attorney. Connor's expression did not change. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek black titanium card, placing it on top of my frozen phone. The Wentworth family retains an entire floor of defense attorneys, Verity. Capital is not our vulnerability. Information is. He leaned forward, tapping his pen against the legal pad. If your parents are fabricating a $150,000 debt, there is a reason they chose that specific number. Extortionists rarely pull numbers out of thin air. They pull numbers that match their existing deficits. We need to find out who actually owes that money. I looked at the black card, then up at Connor. If I am locked out of the official banking networks and my personal accounts are frozen, we need a shadow network. We need someone who understands backdoor credit sweeps and Nevada banking architecture better than the state regulators do. Who? Connor asked. I picked up my phone again, bypassing the frozen banking app, and scrolled to my contacts list. I stopped on a name I had not dialed in 3 months. My Aunt Denise, I told him, my father's sister. She is the director of regulatory compliance at the Venetian. She despises my mother, and she has suspected my parents have been hiding financial rot for years. If anyone can find a phantom ledger buried in this city, it is her. I pressed dial and lifted the phone to my ear, listening to the hollow ringtone. The state had taken my badge, but they had left me with the one weapon my parents never understood: the ability to follow the money. 30 minutes after I ended the call, Aunt Denise walked through my front door without knocking. She possessed a master key to my condo and a profound intolerance for pleasantries. My father's sister was a formidable woman. As an African-American executive in an industry dominated by aging white men, she had carved out her position as Director of Regulatory Compliance at the Venetian through sheer, unrelenting competence. She wore a tailored crimson pantsuit that contrasted sharply against the stark white walls of my entryway. Denise had spent her entire life watching her brother Thomas defer to Diane's endless social climbing. While my parents chased country club status they could not afford, Denise built a concrete career analyzing risk. She despised my mother's manipulative nature. Diane finally overplayed her hand, Denise said, dropping her leather tote onto the granite counter. She did not ask how I was feeling. She operated on the premise that emotions were secondary to strategy, a philosophy she had instilled in me since I was a teenager. I introduced Connor. They exchanged a brief assessing glance. The Boston heir and the Vegas compliance director recognized the same predatory instincts in each other. He offered to fund the defense, I told her. Denise let out a dry, humorless laugh. We do not need his checkbook right now, Verity. We need a secure server routing through a non-compliant jurisdiction. The state locked you out. They did not lock me out. She pulled a heavy, matte black laptop from her tote. Your mother has been running a deficit of truth for 3 decades. I always knew my brother married a parasite. I just waited for the host to start decaying. Let us see how deep the rot goes.
Denise bypassed the standard residential Wi-Fi, plugging a specialized encrypted cellular dongle into her machine. She accessed a proprietary clearinghouse portal used by casino credit departments to sweep background financials on high rollers. It was not strictly illegal for her to run my parents, but it resided in a very dark gray area of regulatory overreach. Tonight, the gray area was our battlefield. "Give me their social security numbers," Denise instructed, her eyes locked on the monitor. I recited them from memory. I had filed their taxes for 7 consecutive years, organizing their chaotic shoeboxes of receipts into pristine schedules. I thought I was being a dutiful daughter. I was actually curating the very data we now used to dissect them. Lines of code and financial routing data cascaded down Denise's screen. Connor stood behind her right shoulder, his arms crossed, watching the numbers populate. I stood on her left, tracing the digital footprint of the people who raised me. The glowing screen reflected in the dark windows of the condo, mirroring the hidden truths we were about to unearth. The initial sweep pulled their primary accounts, the credit union checking, the National Bank mortgage. Those looked normal, almost boring. They paid their utility bills on time. They met their minimum credit card payments. Then Denise ran a secondary sweep, targeting peripheral wire services and offshore routing numbers. She bypassed the domestic filters and tapped into the international clearing nodes. The screen blinked. A new column of data appeared. "There's your pebble," Connor said, his voice dropping an octave. I leaned closer, squinting at the small text. Scattered across the past 14 months were dozens of fractional wire transfers. $500, $1,200, $2,000. They originated from my parents' secondary checking account and terminated in corporate holding entities registered in Costa Rica and Antigua. The holding companies had generic names like Apex Consulting and Global Logistics. "Those are offshore gaming syndicates," Denise stated, her manicured finger tapping the screen. "Unlicensed sports books, the kind that cater to desperate people who have exhausted their legal casino credit lines. They hide behind shell corporations to process the payments." I stared at the outbound wires. The dates aligned with my parents' sudden decisions to skip family vacations. They aligned with their excuses for missing my graduation dinners. They had claimed the consulting market was slow, citing economic downturns to explain their absence. "They were placing bets," I whispered, trying to reconcile the image of my status-obsessed mother with the gritty reality of offshore gambling. My mother cared about thread counts and neighborhood zip codes. She did not know how to read a point spread. "No," Denise corrected, her eyes narrowing at the transaction timestamps. "Look at the frequency, 1st and 15th of every month. Regular intervals. These are not wagers. These are interest payments. They are servicing a debt." She highlighted the transaction nodes and initiated a deep trace, forcing the software to compile the scattered wires into a consolidated liability profile. The fan on her laptop whirred loudly, protesting the heavy data extraction. For 2 agonizing minutes, the kitchen was silent, except for the mechanical hum of the processor. Then the final aggregate number flashed in bold red font across the center of the display. $150,000. The breath left my lungs. The kitchen seemed to tilt. The number was not a random figure my mother pulled from thin air to make her lie sound convincing to Victoria Wentworth. The debt was entirely real. It was quantifiable. It was accruing interest every single day. But it was not mine. "Your mother did not invent a crisis," Connor noted, stepping back from the table. "She simply reassigned the protagonist." "They owe $150,000 to unregulated bookies," Denise said, her voice laced with a lethal mixture of disgust and vindication. "And the markers are coming due. Unlicensed syndicates do not send strongly worded letters when you default. They send collectors." The psychological puzzle pieces snapped together with a sickening crunch. My parents were drowning. The polished suburban facade, the country club memberships, the flights to Boston to fawn over my brother Blake, it was all built on a crumbling foundation of high-yield debt. They had hit the wall.
The offshore bookies were likely threatening their physical safety or their remaining assets. They needed a bailout, an injection of capital large enough to clear the board.
They targeted you, I said, looking at Connor. The realization tasted like copper in my mouth. They did not want to break us up. They wanted to force a settlement. Connor met my gaze, his East Coast pragmatism calculating the variables. My mother is notoriously protective of the Wentworth name. If a scandal threatens our social standing, she neutralizes it. Your parents knew that. They assumed my mother would write a 6-figure check to send the problematic, addicted daughter to a luxury rehab facility. Or they thought she would pay off the debt quietly, just to sweep the Richard family under the rug. They were going to extort your family, Denise concluded, closing the offshore ledger window. Using Verity as the sacrificial lamb. They burn her career to the ground, collect the hush money from Boston, pay off their bookies, and walk away clean. I placed my hands flat on the granite island to steady myself. The sheer predatory nature of their plan defied conventional parental logic. They had carefully calculated the destruction of my decade-long career. They knew the Nevada Gaming Control Board would suspend my license the moment the anonymous tip registered. They counted on my isolation. They expected me to crumble, to become the hysterical, disgraced daughter who would blindly accept whatever narrative they spun to survive. They treated me not as a child, but as collateral damage. There is a structural flaw in their equation, Connor observed. He picked up his fountain pen, rolling it between his fingers. Your mother told my mother that the debt belonged to you. But if Victoria demands proof before authorizing a settlement, how do your parents produce a $150,000 ledger with your name on it? Denise let her hands hover over the keyboard. They cannot forge offshore syndicate records. The bookies operate in shadows. There is no official paper trail to manipulate. Exactly, Connor agreed. Which means they need a secondary mechanism. They need verifiable domestic proof of insolvency attached to Verity's Social Security number. Something local, something real. I felt a sudden, sharp spike of dread. If they were servicing the debt through their own accounts, who actually initiated the principal loan? My parents were reckless, but they were also cowardly. My father avoided risk unless it was insulated. My mother only spent money she believed she was entitled to. Denise, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, look at the origin dates of those offshore wires. When did the first interest payment leave their account? She clicked through the archived rows. 14 months ago. April. The same month, my brother Blake moved to Boston for his prestigious medical residency. The same month, my parents hosted a lavish farewell dinner, bragging about the exorbitant cost of outfitting his new Beacon Hill apartment. Run, my brother, I instructed. Denise paused, her hands resting on the trackpad. Blake. He is the golden child. Diane would rather sell her own organs than let him assume a financial burden. Run him, I repeated. The cold, analytical part of my brain was now fully engaged, pushing past the grief. They are protecting something, or someone, and it is not themselves. Denise did not hesitate. She cleared the previous search parameters from the dark monitor and typed my brother's credentials into the encrypted portal. Her acrylic nails struck the keys with sharp, decisive clicks. Blake Richard was the undisputed pride of our family. He spent his youth insulated by my mother and father, protected from every consequence. When he wrecked his first car, they blamed the intersection. When he failed a college entrance exam, they blamed the testing facility. He now wore a pristine white coat at a premier Boston hospital, projecting the image of a dedicated medical professional. The software bypassed traditional banking nodes and plunged into the unregulated financial sectors. The screen remained blank for a tense 30 seconds. The cooling fan inside the laptop engaged, spinning loudly, as the processor mined data from restricted international servers. Then, the firewall cracked. The display flooded with data. I leaned over the granite counter. The digital ledger was categorized by risk assessment algorithms. My brother did not have a standard checking account issue. He had a sprawling, catastrophic liability profile. He is a ghost in the traditional banking system. Denise noted her eyes tracking the cascading lines of text,
But down here in the shadow economy, your brother is a whale. She opened a subfolder titled Unsecured Syndicate Obligations. Blake had not just dabbled in weekend sports betting, he had engaged in high-stakes, leveraged wagering across multiple offshore platforms. The algorithm aggregated his losses, pulling data from encrypted crypto wallets and anonymous wire transfers. He bet on collegiate athletics, professional leagues, and international tournaments. When the offshore accounts cut off his credit, he turned to local underground Vegas bookmakers to chase his deficits. The final aggregate sum materialized at the bottom of the screen in vivid red font: $250,000. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed my hands flat against the cold stone of the island. $250,000. He leveraged his future medical salary to secure illegal credit lines, Connor observed. His voice remained perfectly flat, analyzing the disaster with East Coast detachment. Bookies love medical residents. They view future physicians as guaranteed return on investment. But Blake stopped paying. Denise highlighted a cluster of dates on the timeline. He defaulted 6 months ago. The syndicate sold his markers to secondary collectors. Those are not individuals who send polite reminder emails. They operate outside the law. They employ violence to balance their ledgers. The scattered puzzle pieces snapped into a horrifying, cohesive picture. The fractional wire transfers my parents sent every 2 weeks were not funding their own illicit habits. They were paying the interest, the VIG. They were draining their suburban resources to keep the underground collectors away from their golden sun. But interest payments do not reduce the principal balance. The bookies were undoubtedly losing patience. They wanted their $250,000, and they wanted it immediately. My parents were terrified. Beneath their country club facade and their designer clothing, they were living in a state of perpetual, suffocating fear. They needed a massive influx of capital to save Blake from physical harm and professional ruin. They looked at their 2 children and made a choice. The psychological blow hit me harder than the corporate suspension. My mother and father did not just view me as a convenient bank. They viewed me as a human shield. They fabricated a lie about a gambling addiction, knowing it would trigger an automatic state investigation and destroy my regulatory career. They intended to ruin my reputation so thoroughly that Victoria Wentworth would authorize a discreet 6-figure severance payment just to sever ties with the scandalous Richard family. They were going to take the Wentworth hush money, pay off the violent men hunting my brother, and leave me standing in the ashes of my own life. I was nothing but collateral damage, a decoy designed to draw enemy fire away from the golden child. A heavy, suffocating pressure built in my chest. The edges of my vision blurred. 10 years of rigorous university study, endless background checks, and exhausting corporate compliance audits felt entirely worthless. I had played by every rule. I built a career founded on integrity and financial transparency. And the people who gave me life were eagerly feeding me to a regulatory shredder to protect a degenerate gambler. My hands began to shake. I curled my fingers into fists, pressing them against my thighs, but the tremor moved up my arms. A profound, hollow ache radiated through my ribs. I closed my eyes, struggling to pull oxygen into my lungs. Connor stepped into my line of sight, breaking my downward spiral. He placed his hands firmly on my shoulders. His grip was strong and grounding, anchoring me to the present moment. "Look at me," he commanded. I opened my eyes. His dark gaze was relentless, stripped of any soft, comforting sympathy. He did not offer a warm embrace. He offered a lifeline, woven from cold logic. "You are letting the betrayal compromise your focus," Connor said, his voice a low, steady current. "Emotion is the enemy of a clean audit. If you break down now, they win. They take my family funds. They rescue your brother, and you become a cautionary tale in a compliance manual." A single tear spilled over my lower lash line. I wiped it away fiercely with the back of my wrist. "They are my parents, Connor. They are supposed to protect me. They are extortionists." He corrected his tone, leaving no room for debate. "They voided the familial contract the second they dialed the Nevada Gaming Control Board. You are a senior financial investigator. Act like one. We do not cry over hostile entities. We dismantle them. His words acted like a chemical catalyst, burning away the grief and leaving a hardened, crystalline anger in its place. He was right. Mourning the parents I thought I had was a waste of valuable time. I needed to focus on the criminals they actually were. I stepped back from his grip, rolling my shoulders to release the tension. I took a deep breath. The tremor in my hand subsided. "Print the ledger," I instructed Denise. Her lips curved into a sharp, approving smile. She connected the encrypted laptop to my wireless printer. The machine whirred to life, spitting out pages of damning financial data. I walked over to the dining table and pulled a thick, empty binder from my work supplies. "We need a master file," I said, taking the first stack of printed papers from the tray. Every offshore wire transfer, every date Blake defaulted on his markers, every fractional payment my parents routed through the Caribbean shell companies. We document the entire timeline of their insolvency. Connor picked up his fountain pen and began indexing the pages as Denise handed them over. The Boston heir organized the illicit casino debts with the same meticulous care he applied to commercial real estate acquisitions. We established a chronological narrative of fraud. "This file is our leverage," Denise noted, sliding a glossy page detailing a crypto transfer into a plastic sleeve. "But leverage is useless unless you have a fulcrum to pry them open. Your parents think they are operating in secret. They believe you are sitting in this condo terrified and confused about your corporate suspension." "They will not wait long," Connor added, writing a date on a yellow tab. "My mother froze the trust assets this morning. When your parents realize the Wentworth capital is inaccessible through casual channels, they will escalate their timeline. Desperate people hate static situations. They will force a confrontation." I closed the master binder, the heavy metal rings snapping shut with a definitive click. The sound echoed in the quiet kitchen. "Let them come," I said. I ran my hand over the dark leather cover of the file. "They think they are negotiating with a disgraced daughter. They have no idea they are walking into an audit." My phone vibrated on the counter. The screen displayed a restricted number. My suspended corporate devices were gone, but my personal line remained active. I stared at the glowing screen. The timing was too precise. The predators were circling, eager to secure their prize, before the state investigation uncovered their deception. I reached for the device, ready to face the architects of my ruin. The restricted number stopped ringing. A sharp knock struck my front door. The sound echoed off the high ceilings of the condo. My parents did not wait for an invitation. Denise moved with lethal efficiency. She reached into her leather tote and extracted a small, matte black recording device. It was a digital lapel microphone, the specific hardware internal affairs investigators utilized for discreet employee interviews. She peeled the adhesive backing away and pressed the small disc against my sternum, right beneath the collar of my silk blouse. Connor closed his laptop. He picked up his phone and paired it with the audio receiver in Denise's hand. "I will monitor from the primary bedroom," he said. "Let them talk. Give them enough rope." I nodded. My heart drummed against the tiny microphone taped to my chest. Connor disappeared down the hallway, the bedroom door clicking shut behind him. Denise slipped into the adjacent guest bathroom, melting into the shadows. I walked to the entryway and pulled the door open. My mother and father stood in the corridor. They looked like a photograph clipped from a luxury lifestyle magazine. My father wore a tailored tan blazer. My mother draped a cashmere shawl over her shoulders. Their faces, however, were arranged into masks of profound, practiced sorrow. "Verity," my mother whispered. She reached out, placing a manicured hand on my forearm. Her touch felt cold. "We came as soon as we heard." I stepped back, allowing them into the condo. I dropped my gaze to the floor, rounding my shoulders to project defeat. The posture was a lie, but it was the exact performance they expected. I guided them into the living room. My father sat on the edge of the velvet sofa. He rested a plain manila envelope on his knees. "You look exhausted, Verity," he noted. His voice carried a manufactured gentleness. "The corporate compliance office called us this morning. They said you surrendered your badge." I wrapped my arms around my waist. The state froze my bank accounts, I replied, keeping my voice shaky and thin. The board thinks I owe $150,000 to unlicensed bookmakers. I have nothing left. My mother sighed a theatrical exhale designed to convey maternal burden. We tried to shield you, she said, leaning forward. We tried to handle this quietly, but the debt collectors were closing in. We had to alert the state before you did something worse. We had to alert Victoria Wentworth. I forced my eyes to widen. You talked to Connor's family.
We had to, my father interjected. He opened the manila envelope and withdrew a single sheet of printed paper. We want to help you rebuild, but first, you have to take responsibility. He placed the paper on the glass coffee table. I leaned down to read it. It was a typed statement, a confession. The document explicitly stated that I, Verity Richard, acknowledged a severe gambling disorder. It detailed a fictitious timeline of reckless wagers and admitted to accumulating a 6-figure deficit. It concluded with a promise to seek immediate, inpatient rehabilitation. Sign it, my mother urged, her voice adopting a soothing cadence. If you sign this, we can take it to the Gaming Control Board. We can tell them you are seeking treatment. It shows cooperation. They might reduce the penalty. I stared at the black ink. The document was a legal suicide note. If my signature touched that page, the state would permanently revoke my auditing license. I would never work in the financial sector again. But what about the debt? I asked, letting my voice crack. Treatment does not pay the bookies. How do I clear $150,000? This is where the extortion pivoted into sharp focus. My parents exchanged a swift, calculated glance. That is why we spoke to Victoria, my mother explained. She crossed her legs, adjusting the cashmere over her knee. The Wentworths are a proud family. They despise public scandals. Victoria assured me they want what is best for Connor, and by extension, you. She paused, letting the silence stretch, building the leverage. If you sign this confession, my mother continued, we will present it to Victoria. We will negotiate a discreet rehab fund. The Wentworth Trust will authorize a wire transfer to cover your facility costs and settle the outstanding debts. We can secure $300,000, half for the bookies, half for your recovery. I kept my face buried in my hands, masking the cold fury hardening my jaw. The tape recorder against my chest captured every syllable. They were not just selling me out, they were pricing me. But Connor's family lives in Boston, I said, playing the confused, terrified daughter. Victoria will not just hand me cash. The Wentworth accountants track every outbound cent. How will you even receive the funds? My father smiled. It was a tight, reassuring expression, devoid of actual warmth. You do not need to worry about the logistics, Verity. Victoria will wire the capital directly into our primary checking account. We will act as your financial proxy while you are in the facility. We will handle the outbound payments to the collectors. I needed them to be specific. Wire fraud requires the intentional use of interstate communications to facilitate a scheme to defraud. They were dancing on the edge of the federal statute. I needed them to jump. A wire transfer across state lines, I repeated, ensuring the microphone caught the exact phrasing. You are going to ask Victoria Wentworth to wire $300,000 from Massachusetts to your Nevada bank account to pay off illegal sports books. Yes, my mother confirmed without hesitation. She believed she was pacifying a broken woman. She had no idea she was dictating her own indictment. We will email the payment routing instructions to her estate attorneys tomorrow morning. The Boston accounts will transfer the capital to our local credit union. We will pay the bookies in cash to avoid a paper trail. Everything stays quiet. The mechanics of the crime are now permanently etched onto digital audio. The solicitation of funds, the interstate wire transfer, the intent to funnel clean capital to illicit criminal syndicates. I looked at the confession on the glass table. I reached for the pen resting beside it. My hand trembled, a genuine physical reaction to the sheer proximity of their betrayal. If I sign this, I whispered, you promise the board will drop the investigation. We will smooth everything over, my father lied. His eyes tracked the tip of my pen.
Just sign, Verity. Let us fix this. I pressed the ink against the paper. I signed my name in fluid, elegant cursive. I handed the document to my father. He took it quickly, slipping it back into the manila envelope as if the paper might catch fire. My mother stood up, smoothing her skirt. The mask of sorrow vanished, replaced by a subtle, triumphant satisfaction. "We will contact Victoria first thing tomorrow," she said. "Pack a bag, Verity. We will find a suitable clinic in Arizona or California by the weekend." I stood up, keeping my arms crossed. I did not walk them to the door. I watched them navigate my entryway, their posture lighter, their steps quick. They had secured their leverage. They believed they had saved their golden son. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind them, the lock engaged. The door to the primary bedroom swung open. Connor stepped into the hallway. His face was a mask of pure, concentrated ice. He held his phone in his right hand. The audio waveform on his screen pulsed in a steady, unbroken green line. In the guest bathroom, Aunt Denise stepped out of the shadows. She leaned against the doorframe, her arms folded across her crimson suit. "We have the intent," Connor stated, tapping the screen to save the encrypted file. "We have the admission of the interstate wire plan. We have the extortion demand." Denise nodded slowly. "They are going to email the routing numbers to Boston tomorrow. The moment they hit send, they cross the federal threshold. But audio recordings are tricky in court. Defense attorneys can argue entrapment or coerce context. We need more than a conversation. We need a financial transaction." Connor pocketed his phone. He walked over to the glass coffee table and looked at the empty space where my forged confession had rested minutes ago. "We need to set a bear trap," he said. "We need them to accept the money under the explicit assumption that it is a ransom." I reached under my blouse and peeled the microphone off my skin. The adhesive stung. "We need to control the other side of the wire," I said. "If they email the demand to the Wentworth estate attorneys, the lawyers will flag it. They will shut it down to protect the trust." Connor turned to me, his dark eyes locked onto mine. "Then we do not use the estate attorneys. We use the architect." I stared at him, the implications setting in. "Your mother." "Victoria Wentworth does not hide behind paralegals when her family is threatened," Connor replied. His voice carried the uncompromising weight of his lineage. "I am flying her to Las Vegas. If your parents want to extort Boston money, they can negotiate the terms with Boston directly. Let us see how your mother handles a predator who actually knows how to hunt." The private elevator ascended to the top floor of the Venetian with silent, engineered precision. Aunt Denise had secured a chairman's suite under a corporate alias, bypassing the standard guest registry. The suite offered 4,000 square feet of marble mahogany and panoramic views of the desert basin. It was a fortress of luxury, insulated from the Nevada Gaming Control Board and the prying eyes of my parents. At precisely 2 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon, the double doors opened. Victoria Wentworth stepped into the foyer. She did not look like a woman whose family name had just been dragged into a Las Vegas extortion plot. She wore a tailored charcoal skirt suit that mirrored her son's overcoat, projecting an aura of effortless, unyielding authority. Her silver hair was pulled back into a severe knot. She carried a slim leather briefcase. She bypassed the sprawling living area and walked directly into the formal dining room where Connor, Denise, and I had assembled our war room. Connor stood up, offering a brief nod. Victoria did not embrace him. She placed her briefcase on the polished mahogany table and took the seat at the head of the board. My mother had built her entire extortion strategy on a tired, outdated stereotype. Diane assumed Victoria was a fragile socialite who would panic at the first hint of scandal. Diane thought she could manipulate the Boston matriarch with tears and whispered tragedies over a phone line. Victoria Wentworth was not a socialite. She was the senior managing partner of a wealth preservation firm that controlled billions in generational capital. She navigated hostile corporate raiders for a living. "I understand you have an audio file," Victoria said. Her voice was crisp, carrying the clipped vowels of the East Coast elite. She did not offer small talk. She demanded data. Connor synced his phone to the suite's centralized speaker system. He pressed play. The dining room filled with the sound of my mother and father sitting in my condo, detailing their plan to extract $300,000 from the Wentworth trusts. They outlined the routing instructions. They promised to suppress the fictitious gambling investigation in exchange for the capital. Victoria listened with her eyes closed. She did not gasp. She did not express outrage. She sat perfectly still, absorbing the tactical layout of the enemy. When the recording finished, the suite settled into a heavy, expectant silence. I slid the heavy master binder across the table. It stopped inches from her manicured hands. "This is the financial autopsy," I explained, keeping my voice steady and professional. "The $150,000 debt is real, but it belongs to my brother Blake. My parents have been servicing the interest through offshore shell companies for 14 months. Yesterday, the underground bookies called the principal due. My parents tipped off the state regulators to destroy my career, creating a crisis they could monetize." Victoria opened the binder. For 10 minutes, the only sound in the room was the crisp turning of heavy paper. She analyzed the fractional wire transfers, the crypto wallet addresses, and the default dates. She read the fake confession my parents forced me to sign. When she finally closed the cover, she looked at me. Her pale blue eyes were sharp and penetrating, stripping away any pretense. "Your parents are remarkably foolish," Victoria stated, "but you are not. Your documentation is flawless. You removed the emotion from the equation and isolated the liability. I respect a woman who knows how to build a paper trail." A tight knot in my chest unspooled. I had spent my entire life trying to earn validation from a mother who viewed my career as a tedious joke. In 10 minutes, the matriarch of the Wentworth family validated my entire existence. Denise leaned forward, resting her elbows on the mahogany table. "We have the motive and the audio recording. But extortion is notoriously difficult to prosecute without a completed transaction. If they sense a trap, they can claim the audio was taken out of context. They can argue they were genuinely trying to fund a rehab facility." Victoria unlatched her leather briefcase. The brass clasps clicked sharply. She withdrew a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy, watermarked parchment. "We are not going to leave them any room for interpretation," Victoria said. She passed the documents down the table. "My estate attorneys drafted this during my flight. It is a confidential settlement agreement." I picked up the contract. The phrasing was dense, layered with the kind of lethal corporate terminology designed to sever limbs without spilling a drop of blood. "The terms are simple," Connor explained, pointing to the second page. "We offer your parents exactly what they asked for, $300,000. In exchange, you break the engagement, you surrender your regulatory license, and you enter a facility of their choosing. The money will be wired directly into their Nevada credit union account by Friday morning." I frowned, tracing the clauses. This gives them everything they want. "Read Section 4, Victoria instructed. I flipped to the 4th page. My eyes scanned the dense paragraphs. The legal phrasing shifted from standard non-disclosure language into something entirely different. The contract explicitly stipulated that the Wentworth family was transferring the funds under the strict condition that Diane and Thomas Richard permanently suppress all damaging information regarding Verity Richard. Furthermore, it required my parents to sign an affidavit acknowledging they were accepting Boston Capital to settle debts unrelated to the medical treatment. I looked up, the brilliance of the trap washing over me. "This is not a settlement," I whispered. "This is a ransom note." Victoria offered a thin, razor-sharp smile. "If your mother signs that document, she legally reclassifies the payment. She transforms a medical gift into a documented extortion demand. She admits in writing to soliciting funds across state lines to conceal a scandal. And she provides the routing numbers to receive the wire," Denise added, her eyes gleaming with dark satisfaction. "The moment she emails that signed contract back to Boston, she triggers the federal wire fraud statute. We do not need the audio recording to prove intent. She will sign a confession of her own." My parents thought they were playing a game of emotional leverage. They had no idea they had stepped into an arena with apex predators. The Wentworth family did not throw tantrums. They drafted binding contracts that doubled as federal indictments. "We deliver the contract tomorrow," Victoria finalized. "I will call Diane and play the role of the horrified, embarrassed socialite. I will tell her my lawyers require this paperwork to release the trust funds. Her greed will override her caution. She will sign it without reading the subtext." I looked at the watermarked paper in my hands. The alliance was forged. The East Coast matriarch and the Vegas auditor were locked into a synchronized strike. We were going to hand my parents a golden parachute, wait for them to jump, and then watch the canopy fail. "Before we execute the protocol," Connor said, turning to his laptop, "we have a procedural hurdle. The estate attorneys require a pristine baseline of your current liabilities. If we are entering into a hostile legal engagement with your parents, we must ensure they have not left any other financial landmines attached to your name. We need a full, unredacted sweep of your identity." I pushed the settlement agreement aside. "The state froze my consumer profiles when they suspended my license," I reminded him. "I cannot generate a standard credit report." Denise pulled her encrypted laptop closer. "The consumer bureaus are locked, but the Nevada real estate and hard asset ledgers are public if you possess the right clearance codes. I can run a deep-tier mortgage history. It bypasses the standard credit freeze." "Run it," Victoria commanded. "We leave 0 variables unchecked." Denise typed my social security number into her terminal. She bypassed the standard banking nodes and tapped into the county property records. I had rented my condo for 5 years. I owned no real estate. The search should have returned a blank page. The cooling fan whined. The screen flickered, loading a dense grid of property liens and asset registers. Denise stopped typing. Her posture went entirely rigid. She leaned closer to the monitor, her eyes scanning the digital rows with sudden, intense disbelief. "Verity," Denise said. Her voice lacked its usual commanding edge. It sounded hollow. I stood up and walked around the table, standing behind her chair. Connor followed. Denise pointed a trembling finger at the center of the screen. 5 years ago, a home equity line of credit was opened against your parents' suburban property. $250,000 was withdrawn against the equity of the house. I stared at the screen. My parents lived beyond their means, but $250,000 equity draw was massive. "Who signed for the line of credit?" Connor asked, his tone dropping into a dangerous register. Denise highlighted the guarantor field. The name blinking in the sterile white light of the monitor was mine, Verity Richard. My lungs seized. The betrayal I felt earlier was a shallow cut compared to this. 5 years ago, I was 24. I was finishing my advanced degrees, living in a cheap apartment, surviving on ramen and study guides. While I was fighting for my future, my parents stole my social security number. They forged my signature on real estate documents. They tied my pristine financial identity to their underwater mortgage to float their golden son's early gambling debts. They did not just sacrifice me to the state regulators this week. They had chained me to the bottom of the ocean half a decade ago. The air in the suite turned to ice. The legal trap we just built was no longer a defensive maneuver. It was a mechanism for pure, unadulterated ruin. I looked at the forged signature on the screen, and the last shred of the daughter I used to be ceased to exist. The line of credit sat on the monitor like a physical weight. $250,000. 5 years ago. I stared at the digital rendering of my forged signature. My heart did not race. My palms did not sweat. A profound, glacial stillness settled over my central nervous system. The woman who had wept in Connor's arms 24 hours ago was gone. The daughter who desperately craved her parents' approval evaporated into the sterile, conditioned air of the Venetian suite. Only the auditor remained. 5 years, Connor said. His voice broke the heavy silence, calculating the timeline with lethal precision. You were 24. You were studying for your state licensing exams. I traced the edge of the mahogany table. The memory felt like it belonged to a stranger. I was working 60 hours a week back then. I lived in a cramped studio apartment above a noisy intersection off the Strip. I ate canned soup to save money for my compliance certification fees. I skipped social events. I barely slept. I was doing everything right. And while I was counting pennies, stressing over every fluctuating decimal in my bank account, my mother and father were sitting in a pristine bank branch, signing my name to a $250,000 home equity line of credit. They used your pristine credit score, Denise explained. Her tone was sharp, layered with profound disgust. Their debt-to-income ratio was already toxic 5 years ago. They could not secure a traditional loan to save Blake from his early gambling losses. So they stole your financial identity. They mortgaged your future to float his. The psychological puzzle snapped together. 5 years ago, Blake had just been accepted into his prestigious medical residency. My parents had thrown a lavish celebration at a country club, praising his intellect and his bright future. They bought him a luxury sedan as a graduation gift. I had assumed they paid for it with their consulting revenue. Instead, they had purchased their golden son's lifestyle using my stolen identity. They had chained me to the bottom of the ocean to ensure he could sail. Victoria Wentworth stood up. She walked to the wet bar, poured a measure of sparkling water, and turned to face me. This elevates the situation, the Boston matriarch stated. We are no longer dealing with simple extortion. This is felony identity theft. It is bank fraud. Your parents have crossed from civil liability into severe criminal territory. I looked at the forged signature again. The letters were perfectly mimicked. My mother had always prided herself on her elegant penmanship. She had used that same elegant cursive to forge my name on holiday cards. Now I realized she had used it to forge my financial death warrant. Print it, I instructed Denise. My voice carried a new frequency. It lacked any warmth. It was the exact tone I used when I uncovered embezzlement rings on the casino floor. Connor watched me. He recognized the shift instantly. He stepped back, giving me the physical space to operate. He did not offer comfort because he knew I no longer required it. I required ammunition. Denise routed the digital real estate documents to the suite printer. The machine engaged, delivering the heavy, undeniable proof of my parents' criminality. I took the warm pages from the tray and slid them into the plastic sleeves of our master binder. We need law enforcement, I said, looking at Denise. But if I walk into a standard precinct to file a report, the complaint becomes public record. The Gaming Control Board will see it in their daily sweeps. My parents will see it. They will panic and abort the extortion plan before Victoria can trap them with the settlement agreement. Denise closed her encrypted laptop. You do not walk into a standard precinct, she said. You utilize the shadows. I spent 15 years running compliance in this city. I know the men who clean up the messes. I know the detectives who understand how to hold a file until the timing is perfect. She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed a local number. She did not introduce herself when the line connected. She simply stated our suite number and requested a discreet visit. 45 minutes later, a sharp knock sounded at the double doors. Connor opened it. A man in a plain gray suit stepped into the foyer. He carried no briefcase. He wore no visible badge. He possessed the tired, observant eyes of a veteran detective who had spent decades untangling the neon corruption of Las Vegas. Detective Rayburn, Denise said, offering a brief nod. Thank you for bypassing the front desk. Rayburn walked into the dining room. He glanced at Victoria Wentworth, instantly recognizing the aura of old East Coast wealth, but his focus quickly settled on me. Denise says you have a paper trail that needs a quiet custodian, he said. I pushed the heavy master binder across the mahogany table. My name is Verity Richard. I began keeping my posture rigid and my voice steady. I am a senior casino financial auditor. 2 days ago, my parents filed a false report with the Nevada Gaming Control Board, alleging I possessed a severe gambling addiction. They utilized that false report to suspend my regulatory license and isolate me. Rayburn opened the binder. He did not interrupt. He was a man accustomed to listening to the ugly mechanics of betrayal. They are currently attempting to extort $300,000 from my fiancé's family, I continued, gesturing toward Connor. But that is a federal wire fraud issue we are handling separately. I asked you here for a local felony. I reached over and flipped the binder to the freshly printed home equity documents. 5 years ago, Thomas and Diane Richard committed identity theft. I stated, pointing to the forged signature. They forged my name on a home equity line of credit against their primary residence. They extracted $250,000. They utilized my clean financial record to secure capital to pay off my brother's early underground gambling debts. They have been secretly draining my equity to protect him. Rayburn studied the documents. He traced the dates, the routing numbers, and the elegant, fraudulent cursive. The silence in the room stretched tight, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. "You want to file charges?" the detective asked, looking up at me. His expression was carefully neutral. "These are your parents. Once I enter this into the secure state database, there is no undoing it. The district attorney will pursue maximum sentencing for bank fraud and identity theft." "I am not seeking a reconciliation," I replied. My gaze locked firmly on his. "I am reporting a crime. I need you to file this quietly. Keep it classified. Do not arrest them today. Do not spook them." Rayburn closed the binder. He understood the complex architecture of a trap. "You are waiting for them to commit a secondary offense. They are going to sign a document tomorrow morning," Connor interjected, stepping forward to stand beside me. "A document that legally reclassifies their request for medical rehab funds into a documented extortion demand. They will transmit that demand across state lines via email. When they hit send, they trigger federal jurisdiction." Victoria Wentworth folded her hands, resting them on the table. "We want the state identity theft charges waiting like an anvil. When the federal wire fraud drops, the local traps spring simultaneously. They will have no avenue of escape." Rayburn nodded slowly. A faint glimmer of respect appeared in his tired eyes. He appreciated a flawless execution. "I will file the home equity fraud as a sealed indictment tonight. The warrants will remain dormant in the system until you give the signal." He took the copies of the real estate documents and slipped them into his inner jacket pocket. He offered me a final, appraising look before turning to the door. "Most people cry when they hand over their family," he noted. "They stopped being my family 5 years ago," I answered. "They just forgot to notify me." The detective left the suite, slipping back into the Las Vegas afternoon as quietly as he had arrived. The heavy double doors clicked shut. The atmosphere in the room felt fundamentally different now. The defensive posture was entirely gone. We had weaponized their past. We had built an ironclad cage using their own greed as the bars. The paper trail was no longer just a shield to protect my career. It was a guillotine waiting for a neck. Victoria Wentworth picked up her leather portfolio. She walked back to the head of the table. Her pale eyes shone with a dangerous predatory light. She looked at me, and I saw a reflection of my own hardened resolve. "The state trap is set," the matriarch announced. "It is time to bait the federal hook." She pulled her personal cell phone from her pocket and placed it on the polished wood. She looked at me, waiting for the final authorization. The dynamic had shifted permanently. I was no longer the desperate daughter seeking rescue from my future mother-in-law. We were equals, partners in a calculated corporate execution. "Call her," I said. Victoria unlocked her screen. She scrolled to my mother's contact information. She pressed the call button and activated the speakerphone. The dialing tone echoed through the silent suite. The transition from forensic investigation to active warfare was seamless. The pieces were perfectly aligned. My mother was about to answer the phone, believing she was stepping into a golden parachute. She had no idea the ground beneath her had already been removed. The phone rang twice before the line clicked open. "Hello?" my mother answered. Her voice carried a delicate, rehearsed fragility. Victoria Wentworth leaned into the microphone. "Diane, this is Victoria Wentworth." A sharp intake of breath hissed through the speaker. My mother had waited for this exact call, yet she managed to sound suitably startled. "Victoria, thank you for calling. Thomas and I we are devastated." "Yes, I imagine so," Victoria replied. Her tone was a master class in Boston austerity. She sounded like a woman holding a soiled rag at arm's length. Connor briefed me on the situation. "I must be candid, Diane. The Wentworth family does not tolerate public spectacles. Connor is slated to take over the primary commercial real estate portfolio next quarter. We cannot have a Nevada regulatory scandal attached to his fiancé. We understand, my mother said quickly. We tried to handle Verity's sickness privately. We really did. But the debt collectors are aggressive. Connor mentioned a figure Victoria interrupted, slicing through the theatrical grief. $300,000 to cover the illicit debts and a residential treatment facility. Is that correct? Yes, my mother breathed. The greed was a tangible vibration through the audio feed. We found a discreet clinic in Arizona. They require payment up front. And the underground bookies, they are threatening her safety. We just want our daughter safe. The Wentworth Trust will provide the capital, Victoria stated. I watched Connor. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his expression carved from stone. He was watching his mother execute a flawless corporate maneuver. Oh, Victoria, my mother sighed. You are saving her life. You are saving our family. I am protecting my son, Victoria corrected, maintaining the icy facade. But my estate attorneys require documentation before releasing trust capital. I have drafted a confidential settlement agreement. It stipulates that Verity will terminate the engagement, immediately surrender her professional licenses, and enter the facility. It also requires your signature as the financial proxy, acknowledging receipt of the funds and guaranteeing your silence regarding this entire ordeal. Send it, my mother urged. I will sign it right now. I need the routing instructions for the wire transfer to include in the final annex, Victoria said, holding a gold pen over a legal pad. Where are we sending the capital? My mother rattled off a string of numbers. She did not provide the routing code for their local Nevada credit union. She bypassed their domestic accounts entirely. Denise's fingers flew across her encrypted keyboard, mirroring the numbers as my mother spoke. The digital clearinghouse software analyzed the routing sequence. That is an international SWIFT code, Denise whispered, pointing at her screen. Victoria continued writing. I have it. I am emailing the PDF to you now, Diane. I will keep the line open. Print it, sign it, and scan it back to me. I want this concluded before the close of business in Boston. Opening my email now, my mother said. We heard the faint rustle of fabric as my mother set her phone down on a hard surface. The speakerphone remained active. She had walked away to use the desktop computer in my father's home office, leaving the phone on the kitchen counter. The ambient noise of my childhood home filtered into the luxurious Venetian suite. It was a surreal intrusion. I could hear the faint hum of their refrigerator. Then my father's voice drifted through the audio feed, muffled but decipherable. Did she send it? Printing it now, my mother's voice replied from the other room. Her fragile, weeping persona had vanished. She sounded sharp, energized, and victorious. 300,000, Thomas. She did not even negotiate. These East Coast people just throw money at their problems to make them go away. Does the contract mention Blake? My father asked. The underlying panic in his tone was evident. No, my mother scoffed. It just demands Verity stay away from Connor and keep quiet. It is a standard non-disclosure agreement. We sign this, we wire the funds straight to Apex Consulting, and the bookies clear Blake's ledger by midnight. I stared at the speakerphone. I did not feel a fresh wave of heartbreak. I felt a profound, chilling detachment. They were standing in the house I grew up in, casually finalizing my destruction to pay off a criminal syndicate. They were celebrating their perceived victory. Denise tapped my arm. Look at the screen. The routing numbers my mother provided had generated a direct match in the shadow database. The SWIFT code belonged to a shell corporation registered in Antigua. The entity name was Apex Consulting. She did not even try to wash the money, Denise said, her voice a low hum of disbelief. She is directing a legitimate Boston wealth trust to wire funds directly to an unlicensed offshore sports betting syndicate. That is textbook money laundering. She thinks she is insulated, Connor noted. She assumes the Wentworths will never look past the settlement agreement. She thinks our desire to hide the scandal outweighs our desire to verify the destination of the capital. The printer in my father's office whirred through the speakerphone. Sign here and here, my mother instructed my father. Initial the bottom. Are you sure about the legal phrasing, my father asked. a final flicker of cowardice stalling his hand. Thomas signed the paper my mother snapped. We have the money. We won. The soft scratch of ink on paper echoed through the line. The sound of a scanner pulling the pages followed a moment later. I looked at Victoria Wentworth. She sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the glowing screen of her tablet. She was waiting for the digital confirmation. The email is sent, Victoria, my mother said, picking her phone back up. The fragile, weeping tone returned instantly. We signed it. We are so grateful. A soft chime resonated from Victoria's tablet. The notification banner slid across the top of her screen. Victoria tapped the icon. The email opened. The PDF attachment loaded. There, glowing on the high-definition display, was the confidential settlement agreement. My mother and father had placed their signatures in bold black ink across the bottom line. They had signed the fourth section, the section that legally classified the payment not as a medical gift, but as a documented demand for capital in exchange for suppressing damaging information. Victoria pressed the mute button on the speakerphone. She looked at Connor, then at Denise, and finally at me. The document is executed, Victoria announced. She unmuted the line. I have received the attachment, Diane. The paperwork is in order. When will the funds be available? My mother asked. The transaction is out of my hands now, Victoria replied, her voice dropping the final layer of pretense. It became a blade of pure ice. The appropriate authorities will handle it from here. Authorities, my mother repeated. The word faltered on her tongue. The confusion was immediate. Victoria, what do you mean? You said the trust would wire the capital. Victoria ended the call. The dial tone hummed for 1 second before the screen went black. The silence in the Venetian suite was absolute. The trap was not just set, it was locked, bolted, and sealed. Let us review the anatomy of the crime, Connor said, stepping up to the mahogany table. He pointed to the digital PDF on his mother's tablet. Thomas and Diane Richard drafted a fraudulent confession to coerce you into compliance. They presented a financial demand to my family. He pointed to the recorded audio file on his phone. They verbalized their intent to secure $300,000 to pay off illicit debts using your career as leverage. Finally, he pointed to the email timestamp. And they just transmitted a signed extortion demand via an interstate electronic communication network. They hit send in Nevada. The email server received it in Massachusetts. Denise leaned back in her chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. Federal wire fraud. Title 18, United States Code, Section 1343, carrying a maximum penalty of 20 years in federal prison, Connor finished. I looked at the signed document. My parents thought they were outsmarting the system. They thought their suburban cunning could outmaneuver a corporate auditor and an East Coast legal dynasty. Instead, they had provided us with every single component required for a federal indictment. They handed us the motive, the method, and the written confession. The identity theft warrants Detective Rayburn filed were waiting in the local database. The federal wire fraud evidence was now secured on multiple encrypted servers. We possessed the power to destroy them from 2 different jurisdictions. But handing the files to the FBI today would be too quiet. An immediate arrest would allow them to control the narrative. My mother would call her country club friends from the precinct, weeping about a misunderstanding, spinning a web of lies to retain her social standing. I refused to let her retain anything. We do not call the authorities yet, I said. Victoria raised an eyebrow. You want to hold the evidence? I want to maximize the impact. I replied, tracing the edge of the master binder. My mother timed her initial phone call to ruin me 2 days before the engagement party. She wanted to orchestrate my social humiliation. I looked at Connor. His dark eyes locked onto mine, recognizing the strategic pivot. The engagement gala is this Saturday night at the Bellagio. I continued, my parents think they are walking into that ballroom with a $300,000 settlement in their pocket. They think they are going to watch me step down, disgraced and broken, while they sip champagne with your guests. A slow nod of approval came from Victoria Wentworth. She understood the architecture of a public execution. We let them dress up, I said, my voice cold and hollow. We let them walk into the Bellagio. We let them believe they won. And then we dropped the floor. Before we do, Denise interjected, tapping her acrylic nail against the table, we are missing one piece of leverage, the golden child. I turned to my aunt. Blake is the catalyst for this entire disaster, Denise explained. Your parents are going to prison, but Blake will play the victim. He will claim he had no idea his parents were extorting the Wentworths or forging your signature. He will walk away clean, hiding in Boston, while you clean up the wreckage. The thought of my brother sitting in his pristine white medical coat, insulated from the destruction he caused, sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through my veins. Denise was right. The ledger was not balanced until the golden child paid his tab. Where is he? I asked. He flew into Vegas this morning, Denise said, turning her laptop screen toward me. He swiped his player's card at a blackjack table off the strip 40 minutes ago. The syndicates cut off his credit, so he's trying to win enough cash to appease the collectors before the weekend. I grabbed my car keys from the counter. The forensic audit was complete. It was time for a field interview. The drive from the Venetian to the off-strip casino took 12 minutes. I navigated the desert traffic with a cold, mechanical precision. My hands rested lightly on the leather steering wheel. The afternoon sun baked the asphalt, but inside the climate-controlled cabin of my sedan, the air felt like a freezer. I was no longer operating on adrenaline or grief. I was running on pure forensic momentum. Denise had tracked my brother to a fading second-tier resort. The property catered to locals and desperate tourists chasing loose slots. It was a stark contrast to the opulence of Bellagio or the prestige of Beacon Hill. This was where gamblers went when the major syndicates cut off their credit. This was where the golden child was hiding. I handed my keys to the valet and bypassed the main lobby. The casino floor smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap citrus disinfectant. The carpet featured a dizzying geometric pattern designed to keep patrons disoriented. I navigated through the labyrinth of ringing slot machines, moving purposefully toward the high-limit card tables located in the back corner. I found Blake sitting at a semicircular blackjack table. He was the only player in the designated VIP pit. From a distance, he still projected the illusion my parents had carefully curated. He wore a crisp, powder blue dress shirt and a designer watch. But as I stepped closer, the facade crumbled. Dark circles bruised the fragile skin under his eyes. His collar was unbuttoned, the fabric wrinkled with sweat. He dragged a trembling hand through his meticulously styled hair. The dealer flipped a 10 of spades, securing a 21 for the house. Blake cursed under his breath. He shoved a meager stack of remaining green chips toward the betting circle. His medical residency in Boston required him to project supreme confidence. Surgeons relied on steady hands and unshakable nerves. Right now, the future physician looked like a cornered animal. I stepped up to the velvet rope separating the high-limit area from the main floor. The pit boss gave me a warning glance, but I unclipped the rope and walked directly to Blake's table. I pulled out the empty leather chair beside him and sat down. He did not look away from the green felt. "Go away, Verity," he muttered, assuming I was a cocktail waitress or a lingering spectator. "I am trying to focus." "Your focus is a mathematical failure," I said, keeping my voice low and flat. "The house advantage on this specific shoe is climbing. You are chasing losses." Blake snapped his head toward me. His eyes widened in genuine shock. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. "Verity, what are you doing here?" I placed my leather purse on the table. The dealer paused, looking at the pit boss for direction. I waved a $50 bill toward the dealer, a universal gesture for privacy. "Take your break," I instructed. The dealer collected the cards and stepped away. The pit boss turned his back, affording us a fleeting window of isolation. Blake swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed against his throat. "You should not be here. Mom said you were dealing with a crisis. She said you lost your job." I leaned closer. The scent of sour fear rolled off him, cutting through his expensive cologne. "Mom said I had a gambling addiction," I corrected. "She told Victoria Wentworth I owed $150,000. She neglected to mention the debt belonged to her golden boy." Blake flinched as if I had struck him. He darted his eyes around the empty casino pit, terrified someone was listening. "Keep your voice down," he hissed. "You do not understand what is happening."
I unzipped my purse and withdrew a slender manila folder. I opened it and placed a single sheet of paper on the green felt right next to his pathetic stack of chips. It was the printout Denise had generated, the digital ledger of his offshore syndicate markers. "I understand you owe $250,000, I stated. My tone was clinical. "I understand you leveraged your future medical salary to place illegal wagers. "I understand you defaulted 6 months ago and the debt was sold to secondary collectors." Blake stared at the numbers. His hands began to shake with uncontrollable tremors. He tried to hide them under the table, but the velvet edge of the bumper blocked his movement. "Where did you get this?" he asked. His voice cracked, stripping away 30 years of arrogant privilege. "I am a financial auditor, Blake," I reminded him. "Finding buried liabilities is my profession. Our parents tried to weaponize my career to orchestrate an extortion plot. They tipped off the state regulators to suspend my license, creating a fake crisis. They planned to extort $300,000 from Connor's family to pay off your bookies." He squeezed his eyes shut. Tears leaked through his lashes, leaving wet tracks down his pale cheeks. "They promised they would fix it. The collectors found my apartment in Boston. They threatened to break my fingers. If they break my hands, I lose my residency. I lose surgery. Mom said she had a plan to get the capital from the Wentworths. She said you would understand." The admission hung in the stale casino air. He knew. My brother, the boy I had protected and supported since childhood, knew. Our parents were plotting my destruction, and he permitted it. He watched them tie me to the tracks to stop the train heading toward him. I flipped the page in the folder. The second document was the home equity line of credit, the loan from 5 years ago. "Look at the signature," I commanded. Blake opened his eyes. He read the guarantor line. A fresh wave of nausea seemed to hit him. He covered his mouth with his trembling hand. "They forged my name," I said, maintaining the steady, lethal cadence. 5 years ago. They stole my financial identity to pull equity out of their house to cover your early losses. They chained me to a $250,000 fraud. "Verity, I swear I did not know about the forged signature," he pleaded, his voice thin and desperate. "I just thought they took out a regular loan. You have to help me. You are marrying into Boston money. Connor can clear my ledger. He will not even miss the cash. Please. If I do not pay the syndicate by tomorrow, they are going to ruin my life." I looked at the man sitting beside me. I searched my chest for a flicker of sympathy, a lingering ember of sisterly affection. I found nothing but cold, empty space. "I am not offering salvation," I said. I pulled a third document from the folder. It was a typed, sworn affidavit drafted by Connor in the Venetian suite. "This is an affidavit," I explained, pushing a black pen across the felt. "It details your exact debt obligations to the underground syndicates. It explicitly states that Thomas and Diane Richard possessed full knowledge of these debts and actively conspired to conceal them. It confirms they orchestrated a false report to the Nevada Gaming Control Board to facilitate a financial settlement. I want you to sign it." Blake stared at the paper. He shook his head, retreating against the back of his chair. "I cannot sign that. If I put this on the record, the hospital administration will see it. The medical board will revoke my license. My career will be over." "Your career ended the moment you placed your first illegal wager," I corrected. "You just delayed the invoice." "I am not signing it," he refused. Finding a brief, pathetic surge of defiance, "You cannot make me betray our parents." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. I unlocked the screen and opened a new text message. "Aunt Denise identified the specific secondary collectors who hold your markers," I told him, tapping the screen. "I have the encrypted contact number for their local enforcer. If you do not sign that paper in the next 10 seconds, I will send them a message containing your exact GPS coordinates and your room number at this casino." Blake stopped breathing. The defiance evaporated, replaced by stark, visceral terror. "You are my sister," he gasped. "You would not hand me over to them." "You handed me over to the state regulators," I replied. "The clock is ticking.
7 seconds. He stared at the blank text message on my screen. He saw the uncompromising void in my eyes. He realized I was not bluffing. The loyal, compliant daughter was dead. The auditor had come to collect the balance. Blake grabbed the pen. His hand shook so violently he could barely form the letters. He scrawled his signature across the bottom of the affidavit, pressing so hard the ink bled through the heavy paper. He dropped the pen and pushed the document toward me. He looked shattered, a hollow shell of the golden boy who used to glide through life without friction. I took the affidavit, verified the signature, and slipped it into the manila folder. The emotional severance was complete. The final illusion of my family lay in pieces on the blackjack table. "What am I supposed to do now?" Blake whispered, burying his face in his hands. "How do I fix this?" I stood up, pushing the heavy leather chair back. "You do not fix it," I said. "You face the deficit." I turned and walked away from the high-limit pit. I did not look back. The stale air of the casino rushed past me as I headed toward the exit. The affidavit was secured. The trap was fully armed. It was time to visit the Nevada Gaming Control Board and redirect the spotlight onto the architects of this disaster. The Grant Sawyer State Official Building was a monument to administrative concrete. It stood a few blocks away from the neon seduction of the Strip, projecting an aura of unforgiving bureaucracy. This was the fortress where gaming licenses were issued, heavily monitored, and ruthlessly revoked. I parked my sedan in the designated visitor lot. Aunt Denise waited near the glass entrance doors. She wore a structured charcoal blazer, mirroring the solemnity of our destination. We cleared the security checkpoint and rode the silent elevator to the enforcement division. The air inside the third-floor corridor smelled of harsh industrial floor wax and recycled ozone. A uniformed receptionist escorted us into an interrogation room disguised as a corporate meeting space. The room featured a cold aluminum table, 6 gray chairs, and a distinct lack of windows. Lead investigator Holden entered 3 minutes later. Holden was a veteran of the regulatory trenches. He had spent 2 decades untangling money laundering operations and dismantling corrupt casino hierarchies. His face carried the rigid, unamused lines of a man who assumed everyone was lying. He carried a thin manila folder bearing my corporate identification number. He took a seat across the aluminum table and placed his folder down. He expected a broken, weeping auditor begging for a second chance. He found something entirely different. I did not slouch. I sat with my spine perfectly straight, my hands resting lightly on the heavy master binder I had brought with me. Miss Richard Holden began. His tone was sandpaper rough. Your corporate access remains under a strict regulatory hold. Standard protocol dictates you retain legal counsel before engaging in dialogue with this division. I am not here to appeal my suspension, I replied. My voice was calm and modulated, matching his professional detachment. I am here to report a coordinated regulatory hijacking. Holden narrowed his eyes. He leaned back in his gray chair, crossing his arms over his chest. Elaborate. I opened my heavy binder and flipped to the first tab. 2 nights ago, an anonymous tip was routed to your department. It alleged I possessed a $150,000 debt with unregulated sportsbooks. That allegation triggered an automatic lockdown of my credentials. It froze my banking profiles. It isolated me. Holden nodded slowly. The system functioned exactly as designed. A compromised auditor is a vulnerability the state cannot ignore. The system functioned perfectly, I agreed, but the initial input was fraudulent. The anonymous tip was not a genuine whistleblower report. It was a calculated weapon deployed by my own parents to manufacture a crisis. I slid the first document across the cold aluminum surface. It was the sworn affidavit my brother Blake had signed at the blackjack table less than an hour ago. Holden picked up the paper. His eyes tracked the paragraphs. The debt exists, I explained, keeping my cadence steady, but it belongs to my younger brother. He leveraged his medical residency to secure illegal credit lines. When he defaulted, the secondary collectors threatened his physical safety. Our parents realized they needed a massive influx of capital to clear his markers. They targeted my fiancé. Connor Wentworth is the heir to a prominent Boston real estate trust. My parents knew his family would pay a premium to avoid a public scandal. Holden finished reading the affidavit. He set it down, his expression shifting from cynical boredom to sharpened curiosity. They framed you to extort your future in-laws? They fabricated a devastating lie to force a settlement, I confirmed. They wanted Victoria Wentworth to wire $300,000 to make the disgraced daughter disappear. They intended to use that capital to pay off my brother's bookies. But they needed the threat to feel legitimate. They needed external validation to panic the Boston Trust. So they used your agency. They filed the false report to force you into suspending my license. They turned the Nevada Gaming Control Board into their personal extortion leverage. A dangerous, quiet fury ignited in the veteran investigator's eyes. Bureaucrats and law enforcement officers harbor a unique hatred for individuals who manipulate their authority for private gain. I turned to the second tab in my binder. I extracted the home equity line of credit documents and placed them next to the affidavit. To fund my brother's early losses, my parents committed identity theft 5 years ago, I stated. They forged my signature to extract $250,000 against their primary residence. They chained my pristine financial record to their underwater mortgage. Holden examined the forged signatures. His jaw clenched. Bank fraud. And finally, Denise spoke up, breaking her strategic silence. She leaned forward, placing a printed copy of the confidential settlement agreement on the table. The federal trigger. I pushed the settlement contract toward him, pointing to the final page. My parents signed this document this morning. It legally reclassifies the proposed medical funds into a documented blackmail demand. Furthermore, they transmitted this signed demand via an interstate email server, providing offshore routing instructions to receive the capital. Holden stared at the array of evidence spread across the table. The thin folder containing my initial suspension notice now looked pathetic compared to the mountain of felony documentation I had delivered. I had walked into a state regulatory office and handed them a perfectly wrapped criminal conspiracy involving extortion, identity theft, and federal wire fraud. You speak our language, Richard Holden murmured. He gathered the documents, aligning their edges with meticulous care. You audited your own family. I audited a hostile enterprise operating within your jurisdiction, I corrected. I am asking you to pivot the lens. Holden reached into his pocket and withdrew his cell phone. He did not hesitate. The Nevada Gaming Control Board possessed sweeping authority, but they often collaborated with local law enforcement for multi-jurisdictional strikes. Who caught the identity theft file? Holden asked, looking at Denise. He knew my aunt possessed deep connections within the municipal precincts. Detective Rayburn, Denise answered. He is holding a sealed indictment pending our signal. Holden dialed the number. He placed the phone to his ear, his eyes never leaving mine. Rayburn, it is Holden over at the Commission. We have a mutually beneficial situation regarding the Richard file. The primary suspect is no longer the auditor. It is the parents. We need to synchronize our timelines. The investigator listened for a moment, nodding sharply. He ended the call and placed his phone face down on the aluminum table. The state warrants are active, Holden announced. Rayburn is assembling a plainclothes unit. My division will coordinate the regulatory strike. We have jurisdiction to detain any individual attempting to launder illicit gambling funds through state channels. Where is the capital exchange supposed to occur? There is no exchange, I clarified. The Boston Trust froze all outbound transfers the moment the email arrived. But my parents do not know that. They believe they have secured their victory. They believe they are attending an engagement gala tomorrow night at the Bellagio to collect their prize. Holden leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. An engagement gala? You want to execute the warrants in public. I want to execute the warrants in a private executive suite off the main ballroom, I specified. My parents are obsessed with social standing. They worship prestige and the illusion of wealth. I want them to walk into a room expecting to find a broken daughter and a rich mother-in-law handing them a blank check. I want them to find a unified task force waiting to strip them of their freedom. The lead investigator absorbed the tactical blueprint. A rare, grim smile touched the corners of his mouth. He appreciated the poetic symmetry of the trap. They used the Bellagio corporate structure to humiliate you. It is only fitting we use the same property to conclude their operations. Holden stood up, gathering the copies of my evidence. Your regulatory hold remains active on paper. We maintain the illusion of your suspension to keep them comfortable. Go home, Miss Richard. Buy a dress. Prepare your guests. Tomorrow night, the commission attends your party. I stood up, closing my empty binder. The heavy feeling that had suffocated me for 48 hours vanished entirely. The defensive maneuvers were finished. The investigative phase was closed. The regulatory machinery of the state was now moving in tandem with the East Coast legal dynasty. All the pieces of the forensic revenge plot were locked into place, forming an inescapable net. Denise and I walked out of the sterile conference room, leaving the lead investigator to mobilize his agents. We navigated the harsh fluorescent corridors and rode the elevator back to the ground floor lobby. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip below the desert horizon, painting the Las Vegas sky in bruised shades of purple and burnt orange. The narrative tension stretched tight, vibrating like a tuned piano wire. My mother and father were currently sitting in their suburban home, celebrating their counterfeit triumph, unaware that an avalanche of federal and state justice was poised directly above their heads. They thought they had buried me. They forgot that seeds thrive in the dark. Tomorrow, the harvest would be absolute. The private ballroom at the Bellagio smelled of imported orchids and chilled champagne. The vaulted ceiling featured hand-painted frescoes illuminated by tiered crystal chandeliers that cast a fractured golden light across the polished marble floor. It was Saturday evening. The engagement gala I had spent 6 months planning was finally unfolding. The room buzzed with the low, cultivated hum of East Coast generational wealth merging with Nevada corporate elite. Waiters in crisp white jackets circulated with silver trays of caviar and vintage wine. The string quartet in the corner played a classical arrangement, providing a flawless acoustic backdrop for the deception. I stood near the grand entrance holding a crystal flute of sparkling water. I wore a midnight blue silk gown. The fabric was structured, featuring sharp lines and a high neckline. It did not look like a dress meant for a blushing bride. It looked like armor. Connor stood beside me in a tailored black tuxedo, his posture a masterclass in Boston austerity. He rested his hand on the small of my back, a silent, grounding anchor amidst the swirling crowd. We projected a unified front. To the oblivious guests, we were a young power couple celebrating our future. To the individuals who knew the truth, we were apex predators waiting for the trap to spring. The dramatic irony of the evening was a tangible current running under my skin. I scanned the room, identifying the quiet anomalies hidden among the socialites. A man in a tailored gray suit stood near the terrace doors, sipping a martini he never actually drank. He was one of Investigator Holden's senior regulatory agents. 2 women in elegant evening gowns lingered near the coat check, their eyes scanning the perimeter with clinical precision rather than social curiosity. Detective Rayburn had placed 3 plainclothes financial crimes detectives in the catering staff. The man pouring a vintage Bordeaux for a Boston real estate tycoon possessed the calloused hands of a veteran municipal cop. The ballroom was not just a venue. It was a holding cell draped in silk. At 8:15, the heavy mahogany doors swung open. My mother and father stepped into the foyer. They had dressed for a coronation. My mother wore a silver sequined gown that caught the chandelier light, ensuring she drew the eye of every guest in her immediate vicinity. She wore her hair in an elaborate updo, her neck adorned with a diamond tennis necklace they could not afford. My father wore a classic tuxedo, projecting the image of a successful suburban patriarch. They paused at the threshold, scanning the room. They expected to find a subdued, somber gathering. They expected to see me hiding in a corner, weeping into a handkerchief, ruined by the state suspension and desperate for their engineered salvation. Instead, my mother locked eyes with me. I did not avert my gaze. I did not shrink. I stood at the center of the room, radiant and unyielding. The micro-expression that flashed across my mother's face was fascinating to observe. Her practiced smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A brief, sharp spike of confusion knitted her brow. She had orchestrated my destruction. She knew the Nevada Gaming Control Board had stripped my credentials. She could not comprehend why I looked like a woman who owned the building. She quickly recovered, pasting the tragic, brave smile back onto her face. She looped her arm through my father's elbow and guided him toward us. They navigated the crowd with practiced grace, stopping to nod at Connor's relatives, playing the role of the heartbroken but supportive parents. "Verity, darling," my mother murmured as she approached. She reached out, grasping my free hand with a cold, desperate grip. "You look beautiful, but you must be exhausted. How are you holding up?" "I am surviving," I replied, my voice a flat, unreadable surface. The evening is progressing exactly as planned. My father stepped forward, offering Connor a firm handshake. Connor accepted it, his expression giving away nothing. Thomas Connor said smoothly, "We appreciate you making the effort to attend, given the recent complications." "We would not miss it," my father said, adopting a solemn tone. "Family must stand together during difficult transitions." "Is your mother available, Connor?" Diane and I were hoping for a brief word to finalize the logistics we discussed on Wednesday. The greed radiating from them was palpable. They were standing in a room filled with multimillionaires, yet all they could think about was the $300,000 wire transfer they believed was waiting for them. They thought the confidential settlement agreement they signed had secured their victory. They were eager to collect their ransom pay off Blake's underground syndicates and walk out of the Bellagio with their pristine suburban facade intact. "She is mingling with the board members," Connor deflected smoothly. "She will find you when she is ready. Enjoy the champagne, Diane." My mother offered a tight nod, unable to mask her impatience. She turned to me, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Has the state contacted you today, Verity? You have not checked your corporate email, have you?" "My corporate devices remain in the custody of the compliance division," I answered, reciting the exact truth they wanted to hear. "I am entirely disconnected from the network." "Good," my mother breathed, a genuine flicker of relief crossing her features. "It is better this way. Let us handle the burden. Victoria promised to initiate the transfer tonight. You just keep smiling for the guests, sweetheart. We will take care of the rest." I watched her walk away, dragging my father toward the carving station. She was so blinded by her own cunning, she failed to notice the details. She did not notice that the waiter refilling her water glass carried handcuffs under his tailored white jacket. She did not notice that Blake was absent, having called her earlier to claim a sudden illness, too terrified to face the trap he knew was springing. She only saw the money. The pacing of the evening slowed down, stretching every second into a taut wire. I circulated through the room with Connor, engaging in the required social pleasantries. I spoke with Boston hedge fund managers and Las Vegas hospitality executives. I discussed market trends and real estate acquisitions. Every conversation required a fraction of my attention. The rest of my focus remained locked on my parents. They stood near the ice sculpture, their anxiety leaking through their polished exterior. My father checked his watch every 3 minutes. My mother tapped her manicured fingernails against the stem of her champagne flute. They were waiting for the signal. The tension was agonizingly slow. I watched them exchange hushed, urgent whispers. They were likely discussing the offshore routing numbers, calculating how quickly they could funnel the Wentworth capital to the Antigua Shell Company to appease the secondary collectors. Aunt Denise materialized beside me. She wore a striking crimson evening gown, her hair swept into a sleek chignon. She held a crystal tumbler of sparkling water. "They are sweating," Denise noted, her voice a low, satisfied murmur. "Thomas looks like he wants to bolt. Diane is holding him together through sheer force of will." "They think they are waiting for a check," I replied, keeping my eyes fixed on the crowd. Denise offered a sharp, dangerous smile. "They are waiting for the butcher. Holden has his men positioned at the primary exits. Rayburn's detectives are covering the service corridors. The perimeter is sealed. We are just waiting on the matriarch." As if summoned by the title, Victoria Wentworth entered the main ballroom.
She commanded the space without uttering a single word. She wore a floor-length black velvet gown that absorbed the chandelier light. An antique diamond brooch rested at her collarbone. She moved through the sea of wealthy guests with the innate authority of a monarch surveying her court. My mother spotted her instantly. Diane's posture stiffened. She abandoned her conversation with a distant Wentworth cousin and nudged my father. They stood at attention, their eyes tracking Victoria's every move. Victoria did not rush. She engaged in a brief, polite exchange with the senator from Massachusetts. She smiled at a federal judge. She allowed the suspense to build, letting my mother marinate in her own desperate anticipation. The psychological torture was deliberate and masterful. Finally, Victoria turned her head. She caught my mother's eye from across the polished marble floor. Victoria did not smile. She offered a single, imperceptible nod. It was the silent cue, the invitation to the back room, the signal that the illicit transaction was ready to be finalized. My mother's face illuminated with profound, greedy relief. She grabbed my father's arm. They began navigating toward the discreet hallway that led to the executive suites, stepping away from the music, the champagne, and the safety of the crowd. Connor placed his hand on my shoulder. His grip tightened slightly. "It is time," he said. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the chilled, floral air of the ballroom. I set my crystal flute on a passing waiter's tray. The agonizing wait was over. The social performance had concluded. I turned away from the grand party and walked toward the isolated, soundproof suite, ready to deliver the final audit. The heavy oak doors sealed shut behind me, severing the classical music and the low hum of the gala. The executive corridor was a study in sensory deprivation. Thick wool carpeting absorbed my footsteps. The lighting shifted from the warm gold of the ballroom to a sharp, functional white. I walked toward the boardroom at the end of the hall, my silk gown rustling in the quiet space. Inside the designated suite, the atmosphere was pressurized. The room was designed for high-stakes corporate negotiations. It featured soundproof walls, a sprawling mahogany table, and zero distractions. I took the leather chair at the head of the table. Connor stood immediately to my right, his posture conveying unbroken solidarity. Aunt Denise sat to my left, her crimson dress a stark contrast against the dark wood. She arranged her encrypted laptop in front of her, the screen dark. Two men in tailored dark suits occupied the corners of the room. Lead investigator Holden stood near the reinforced glass window, his arms folded. Detective Rayburn positioned himself near the secondary exit. They wore no badges, they offered no introductions. Their presence alone generated a distinct, suffocating gravity. They were the silent executioners of the state, waiting for the signal to drop the blade. 3 minutes later, the primary door handle turned. Victoria Wentworth entered first. She moved with a fluid, unhurried grace, holding a slim leather portfolio. She stepped aside, allowing my parents to enter the trap. My mother crossed the threshold with her chin held high. She gripped a silver evening clutch tight against her waist. My father followed close behind, his eyes darting nervously around the sterile environment. They had walked down this corridor expecting a quiet surrender. They anticipated a tearful daughter, a desperate future mother-in-law, and a stack of banking documents ready for their signatures. My mother stopped abruptly. Her silver sequined gown caught the harsh overhead light. She scanned the room, her gaze sweeping over the two unidentified men in the corners, then resting on me. I did not cower. I sat at the apex of the mahogany table, my hands folded on the polished surface. I watched her with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a predictable organism. The confident veneer on my mother's face fractured. Her mind scrambled to process the visual data. She expected a private exchange, not a tribunal. She looked at Victoria, attempting to project confusion and offense. "Victoria," my mother said, her voice tight and defensive, "what is the meaning of this? You said we were finalizing the financial transfers in private. Why is Verity sitting there? She needs to be preparing for her departure to the clinic. The state regulators are already circling." Victoria did not answer immediately. She walked to the opposite end of the long table facing me directly. She pulled out a chair
and sat down, resting her leather portfolio on the wood. She folded her hands, mirroring my posture perfectly. "We are here to finalize the transaction," Victoria stated, her voice devoid of any warmth or urgency. "However, the Wentworth Trust requires a thorough risk assessment before deploying capital. We do not dispense funds in the dark." My mother stiffened. She stepped closer to the table, pulling my father along by the sleeve of his tuxedo. "We provided the settlement agreement," she argued, raising her chin. "We signed the documents you requested. The underground bookies are expecting their payment tonight. If you delay the wire transfer, Verity will face severe physical and professional consequences. You promised to protect Connor from this scandal." She was doubling down. Faced with an unpredictable variable, my mother reverted to her favorite weapon. She leveraged my fabricated ruin to extort compliance. She thought repeating the lie about my gambling debt would force the Boston matriarch to panic and authorize the payment. Victoria looked at my mother with a profound, chilling pity. She did not raise her voice. She did not exhibit anger. She delivered her response with the sterile precision of a corporate execution. "The Wentworth family does not negotiate with terrorists, Diane." The sentence struck the room like a physical blow. My father visibly flinched, taking a half step backward toward the door. His cowardice was instinctual. He recognized the tone of a predator closing its jaws. My mother, however, was blinded by her own hubris. Her face flushed a deep, mottled red. Her grip on the silver clutch turned white-knuckle tight. She refused to accept the shifting power dynamic. "Excuse me," my mother snapped, dropping the fragile persona entirely. Her voice turned brittle and sharp. "We are trying to save your son from a disgraced marriage. If you refuse to honor the agreement we signed, we will walk back into that ballroom right now. We will tell every senator, judge, and hedge fund manager in attendance exactly why Verity lost her regulatory license. We will expose her sickness to your entire social circle." The threat hung in the soundproof air. It was the ultimate display of her toxic vanity. She believed reputation was the most valuable currency on earth. She thought the fear of a public scandal would force us into submission. I unclasped my hands. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool mahogany. "You are welcome to return to the ballroom, Mom," I said. My voice was a low, steady current slicing through her rising panic. "But you will find the audience unreceptive to your narrative." My mother snapped her attention back to me. "You have no authority here, Verity. You are suspended. You are broken. You have nothing." I reached under the table and lifted the heavy black master binder onto the polished wood. The thud of the thick spine hitting the table echoed in the quiet room. "This is a forensic audit," I explained, resting my hand on the leather cover. "It contains a chronological mapping of your financial insolvency. It is a comprehensive ledger of every lie, every hidden debt, and every fraudulent transaction you engineered over the past 5 years." My father swallowed hard. The sound was audible in the heavy silence. "Diane," he whispered, pulling on her arm. "Diane, we need to leave." My mother ignored him. She stared at the black binder, a flicker of genuine dread finally piercing her narcissism. "What is that?" she demanded, her voice losing its sharp edge. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, the woman who had eagerly planned my destruction to finance my brother's illegal habits. I felt zero sorrow. I felt the pure, cleansing clarity of an auditor closing a corrupt account. I placed my palm flat on the binder. I pushed it forward. The heavy folder slid across the smooth mahogany surface, gliding with frictionless momentum. It came to a halt precisely 2 inches from my mother's silver clutch. "This is your balance sheet," I said softly. My mother stared down at the dark cover. She did not reach for it. She instinctively understood that opening the folder would initiate an irreversible chain of events. The air in the executive suite grew thick and suffocating. The 2 unidentified men in the corner shifted their weight, stepping inches closer to the light. The trap had closed. The exits were sealed. The only path forward was through the pages resting in front of her, marking the beginning of the final, inescapable avalanche. My mother stared at the black leather cover of the binder resting on the mahogany table. Her fingers hovered over the edge, shaking just enough to make her diamond rings catch the harsh overhead light. The silence in the soundproof suite magnified the faint, uneven rasp of her breathing. She was a woman who had spent her entire adult life curating an image of flawless suburban prosperity. She could sense that the contents of this folder threatened to dismantle that carefully constructed facade.
Turn the page. Diane Victoria Wentworth instructed from the opposite end of the long table. Her voice carried the weight of a judge delivering a sentence. My mother swallowed hard. She grasped the cover and flipped it open. The first document rested inside a clear plastic sleeve. It was not a bank statement or a regulatory notice. It was a typed transcript. The header displayed a digital timestamp from 2 nights ago, matching the exact hour they had visited my condo. The text was formatted like a screenplay, detailing a precise, verbatim exchange. My mother read the highlighted lines. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin an ashen gray. She was reading her own words. She was reading her own voice, promising to negotiate a discreet rehab fund, instructing me to sign a fake confession, and mapping out the routing logic to funnel Wentworth Trust Capital to underground bookies. "You wore a wire," she whispered. Her gaze snapped upward, locking onto my face with a mixture of horror and profound betrayal. "You recorded your own parents in your living room?" I documented a hostile negotiation. I corrected my tone, devoid of any familial warmth. "You entered my home intending to extort my future in-laws, using my career as collateral." I preserved the evidence. My father leaned over her shoulder, his eyes scanning the transcript. His mouth opened in silent panic. He recognized the irrefutable nature of recorded audio. The deniability they relied upon was gone. "Turn the page," I instructed. My mother's hand shook as she flipped the plastic sleeve. The second document appeared. The crisp logo of a national bank sat at the top of the page. It was the home equity line of credit from 5 years ago. Her eyes dropped immediately to the bottom of the form, locking onto the guarantor signature line. She saw my name penned in her own elegant, fraudulent cursive. The breath hitched in her throat. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The secret she thought was buried beneath years of mortgage payments and fake holiday cheer was sitting under the harsh fluorescent lights of a Las Vegas executive suite. "You forged my identity," I stated, the chill in my voice freezing the air between us. "You stole my pristine financial record to extract $250,000 against your underwater property. You chained me to a felony bank fraud to float early gambling debts for a son who could not control his impulses." "That was a temporary measure," my father stammered, stepping back from the table as if the paper itself radiated heat. "We intended to pay it back. We were protecting the family. We just needed time." "You bought time with a stolen credit profile," Connor interjected. His dark eyes remained fixed on my father. "And you repaid the loan by throwing the victim to state regulators." "Turn the page," I ordered, cutting off my father's pathetic rationalization. My mother turned the heavy sleeve. The third document lay flat against the wood. It was the sworn affidavit. The paper bore the distinct, messy signature of my brother. For the first time since entering the room, my mother's polished armor shattered. She let out a sharp, wounded gasp. She recognized her son's handwriting instantly. She read the clinical legal paragraphs where the golden child detailed his sprawling offshore liabilities, admitted to defaulting on the markers, and confirmed that his parents orchestrated the false regulatory tip to save him from secondary collectors. "No," my mother breathed, shaking her head in frantic denial. "No, Blake would never sign this. You forced him. You threatened him. He is a physician. He would never betray us." "He did not betray you," I said smoothly. "He saved himself. I confronted him at an off-strip blackjack table this afternoon. When faced with the reality of his own destruction, your golden boy sold you out in less than 10 seconds. He signed the confession to keep the syndicates away from his hospital residency. He let you take the fall." The psychological devastation was absolute. My mother had justified every lie,
every theft, and every cruel manipulation as a necessary sacrifice for his prestigious future. Now she held the documented proof that her beloved son viewed her as an expendable asset. The illusion of her perfect family was dead killed by the very boy she had ruined me to protect. "Turn to the final page," Victoria instructed, her tone indicating the execution was reaching its climax. My mother's fingers were stiff, nearly uncooperative, as she moved to the final section of the binder. The layout was different. On the left side of the spread was a printout of the Federal Criminal Code. A specific section regarding wire fraud was illuminated with bright yellow highlighter. On the right side was the email my mother had sent to Victoria less than 2 hours ago. It displayed the confidential settlement agreement bearing both of my parents' signatures, accompanied by the offshore routing instructions. "You believed you were outsmarting a naive daughter and a desperate socialite," Connor said, stepping closer to the table. His Boston accent clipped the consonants with sharp precision. "But you failed to read the trap. The settlement contract you signed legally reclassified the Boston capital. You acknowledged the funds were a ransom for your silence. And then you transmitted that signed extortion demand across an interstate electronic network," Aunt Denise added, folding her hands on her dark laptop. "You hit send in Nevada. The server received it in Massachusetts. You provided international routing codes to an unlicensed syndicate. You walked out of a civil dispute and marched yourselves directly into a federal felony," I concluded. "The state has you for identity theft and regulatory manipulation. The federal government has you for wire fraud and extortion." The magnitude of their ruin finally penetrated my father's cowardice. He stared at the highlighted federal statute. A primal, animalistic panic seized him. He realized the paper on the table was the only physical tether connecting him to a prison cell. He lunged forward. He threw his body toward the mahogany table, reaching with both hands to grab the open binder. His intent was obvious. He wanted to tear the pages, to shred the signatures, to destroy the nightmare sitting in front of him. He never reached the leather cover. Connor moved with blinding speed. He stepped into my father's path, bringing his forearm down across my father's chest. The impact halted my father's momentum instantly. Connor gripped the lapel of the older man's tuxedo, shoving him backward with a calculated, effortless strength. My father stumbled, his polished dress shoes slipping on the wool carpet, until he crashed back into the leather chair. "Do not touch that folder," Connor warned. His voice dropped to a lethal, quiet register. The restraint in his tone was far more terrifying than a shout. "You are currently looking at decades of incarceration for financial crimes. If you lay a finger on that binder, I will ensure the prosecution adds tampering with evidence and obstruction of justice to the indictment. Sit down and do not move." My father collapsed into the chair, his chest heaving, his eyes darting frantically toward the door. He was a beaten man, stripped of his pride and his fabricated authority. My mother began to hyperventilate. The rapid, shallow breaths echoed in the silent room. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. The cold reality of her situation had dissolved her arrogance. She had no leverage. She had no escape route. She resorted to the only tactic she had left. She looked up at me. Real tears spilled over her lashes, ruining her expensive makeup. "Verity, please," she sobbed, her voice breaking. She reached a trembling hand toward me across the polished wood. "You cannot do this. We are your parents. We made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but we did it out of love. We did it to protect the family. We were terrified. You have to understand, everything we did for this family." I looked at the woman crying in front of me. I studied the desperation in her eyes. I felt no pity. The forensic audit had sterilized my heart. "You do not have a family, Mom," I said. The words fell from my lips like shards of ice cold and final. "You have a balance sheet, and you are bankrupt." The echo of my final sentence lingered in the sterile, soundproof air of the executive suite. My mother stopped crying. The theatrical tears dried, instantly replaced by a rigid, wide-eyed stare. The transition from manufactured sorrow to genuine, paralyzing fear was stark. She looked at the heavy leather binder resting on the mahogany table. then at me, searching for a trace of hesitation or mercy. She found a void. The daughter she had conditioned to seek validation, the girl who had funded her suburban illusions, was gone. The two unidentified men standing in the shadowy corners of the room finally moved. Their synchronized steps against the thick wool carpet broke the agonizing silence. They walked into the harsh overhead light, positioning themselves on either side of my parents. The physical shift in the room was immediate. The temperature seemed to drop. The calculated corporate negotiation morphed into a law enforcement sting. My father gripped the armrests of his leather chair. His knuckles turned a mottled white. He looked up at the man standing to his left. Detective Rayburn reached inside his plain gray suit jacket. He did not pull a weapon. He produced a leather wallet, flipping it open to display a polished silver municipal shield. Thomas and Diane Richard Rayburn stated his voice a low, gravelly current, devoid of any inflection. I am Detective Rayburn with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Financial Crimes Division. I am executing a sealed state indictment. You are under arrest for felony identity theft and first-degree bank fraud, stemming from a forged home equity line of credit secured 5 years ago. My father's jaw dropped. A soft, breathless wheeze escaped his throat. He tried to push himself out of the chair, but his legs failed him. He collapsed back against the leather, his chest heaving as the reality of the charges crushed the oxygen from his lungs. The man standing to my mother's right reached into his breast pocket. Lead investigator Holden produced his own credentials, featuring the imposing, unmistakable seal of the state regulatory agency. I am lead investigator Holden, representing the Enforcement Division of the Nevada Gaming Control Board, he announced. The authority in his tone commanded absolute submission. Furthermore, you are both being detained for filing a fraudulent report to a state agency, attempting to manipulate a regulatory body to facilitate extortion. My mother stared at the badges. The polished metal caught the fluorescent light gleaming with undeniable permanence. Her meticulously constructed universe, built on country club gossip, designer labels, and social climbing, shattered into irreparable fragments. The prestige she worshipped had turned into a steel trap. This is a mistake, my mother stammered, her voice thin and reedy. She looked toward Victoria Wentworth, attempting one final, desperate pivot. Victoria, tell them we had a settlement agreement. We were negotiating a private medical fund. This is a civil matter. It is a family misunderstanding. Victoria remained seated at the far end of the mahogany table. She did not blink. She folded her hands in front of her, projecting the icy detachment of an apex predator observing its prey. The Wentworth family does not involve itself in criminal disputes. Diane, the Boston matriarch, replied. You provided written documentation of an extortion demand. You solicited capital across state lines. The federal authorities will receive the wire fraud evidence before midnight. You are no longer my concern. Holden unclipped a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The metallic ratcheting sound sliced through the suite. It was a sharp, clinical noise that signaled the definitive end of my parents' freedom. Stand up, Holden instructed my mother. Place your hands behind your back. My mother recoiled. She pressed herself against the edge of the mahogany table, her silver sequined gown catching the hard angles of the wood. The vanity that governed her entire existence surged forward, overriding her survival instincts. She could not process the legal jeopardy. She could only process the social humiliation. You cannot do this here, my mother hissed, her eyes darting toward the heavy oak doors leading back to the gala. We are guests at a Bellagio engagement party. Half the Las Vegas Hospitality Board is out there. A federal judge is drinking champagne in the ballroom. If you march us through that lobby in handcuffs, it will cause a scene. You will ruin the evening. Holden secured her left wrist, pulling her arm behind her waist with practiced, unyielding force. He clamped the steel ring closed. You are not going to the lobby, Holden corrected. Rayburn hauled my father out of his chair, spinning him around and clicking a second pair of cuffs around his wrists. My father offered zero resistance. He hung his head, his shoulders slumped in total defeat, a coward submitting to gravity. We utilize the service elevators for asset removals, Rayburn explained. Securing the lock on my father's restraints. You will be escorted down the freight corridor. You will ride in the laundry lift to the loading dock, where an unmarked transport vehicle is waiting. You are not going to be a public spectacle tonight, Mrs. Richard. You are going to be invisible. The psychological blow landed with devastating precision. My mother could have survived a public scandal. She could have spun a theatrical exit playing the tragic victim dragged away by heartless authorities. She craved an audience. But Rayburn and Holden were denying her the spotlight. They were treating her like discarded refuse, sweeping her out the back door alongside the soiled linens and empty champagne bottles. She let out a strangled, humiliating sob. The realization that she was entirely irrelevant broke her. Holden gripped her elbow, steering her toward the secondary exit at the rear of the executive suite. Rayburn mirrored the action, guiding my father. They did not read the Miranda warning in the room. They saved the procedural dialogue for the concrete tunnels below the casino, ensuring the silence of the suite remained unbroken. My father did not look back. He kept his eyes fixed on the patterned wool carpet. My mother paused at the threshold. She twisted her neck, peering over her shoulder to look at me one last time. Her mascara was smeared. The silver gown looked suddenly cheap and ridiculous. She searched my face looking for the obedient, desperate girl she had manipulated for 29 years. I sat at the head of the mahogany table, flanked by my aunt and my fiancé. I offered her a slow, deliberate nod of dismissal. The secondary door swung shut. The lock clicked. They were gone. The oppressive tension evaporated, leaving the suite feeling vast and pristine. The extortionists were neutralized. The false narrative was destroyed. The forensic audit was closed. Victoria Wentworth wasted no time reveling in the victory. She picked up her cell phone and dialed a 10-digit number. The Boston matriarch transitioned from the trap to the aftermath without missing a beat. "Connect me to the senior litigation partner," Victoria ordered when the line connected. She stood up, walking toward the reinforced glass window overlooking the neon grid of the city. "We have actionable fraud. I want ex parte restraining orders filed in the Nevada Municipal Court by tomorrow morning." Connor closed the master binder, running his hand over the dark leather cover. "What is the target?" he asked his mother. Victoria kept the phone to her ear. The Richard suburban property, she answered. Thomas and Diane Richard secured a $250,000 home equity line utilizing stolen credentials. That capital was obtained illegally. I want immediate liens placed on all their remaining physical assets, freeze their checking accounts, seize their vehicles. They attempted to steal from the Wentworth Trust. In response, we will legally extract every single cent of equity they possess to repay the fraudulent debt they hung around Verity's neck. Denise powered down her encrypted laptop. The screen faded to black. "They will require a public defender," she noted, her tone laced with dark satisfaction. "They cannot afford a private defense attorney if the Boston lawyers freeze their liquidity. They are going to face a federal prosecutor with court-appointed counsel." "They gambled with a rigged deck," Connor stated. He stepped behind my chair, resting his hands on my bare shoulders. The warmth of his touch chased away the lingering chill of the confrontation. "They lost the house." I stood up, smoothing the front of my midnight blue silk gown. The armor had served its purpose. My name was clear. My license was safe. My parents were currently riding a freight elevator down to a concrete loading dock, their social climbing dreams ending in profound, documented ruin. But the night was not over. Beyond the heavy oak doors, the string quartet was still playing. The champagne was still flowing. 200 of the most influential people in Boston and Las Vegas were mingling under crystal chandeliers, waiting for the guests of honor to return. Victoria ended her phone call and slipped the device into her leather portfolio. "The legal machinery is in motion," she announced. "The liens will be active before sunrise." She walked back to the table, her pale eyes locking onto mine. She evaluated me not as a prospective daughter-in-law, but as a seasoned veteran recognizing a peer. "You executed a flawless audit, Verity. You protected this family. Now we have an engagement to celebrate." I picked up my small clutch from the table. The war was won, but the victory required an audience. The guests outside expected a scandal. They anticipated whispered rumors and fractured relationships. It was time to rewrite the social ledger. I turned toward the primary doors. Connor offered his arm. I looped my hand through his, feeling the steady, reassuring rhythm of his pulse against my wrist. I was no longer the discarded daughter. I was the architect of my own restitution. We walked toward the brass handles, ready to step back into the golden light and face a room full of powerful people who were about to realize exactly who was running the board. The transition from liability to asset occurred at 9 in the morning. Lead investigator Holden did not schedule the meeting in the windowless interrogation room. He reserved the primary executive boardroom at the Grant Sawyer State Office building. Holden sat at the head of the long table. He pushed a familiar plastic card across the polished veneer. It was my Bellagio security badge. Next to it rested my corporate laptop and my secondary secure phone. The Nevada Gaming Control Board concluded its review, Holden stated. His voice retained its signature grit, but the adversarial edge was gone. The anonymous tip is officially classified as a fraudulent submission. Your compliance record is pristine. The regulatory hold on your personal and corporate banking profiles is lifted. I picked up the security badge. The weight of the plastic felt different in my palm. It was no longer just a hall pass. It was a trophy. Holden slid a second document toward me. It was printed on heavy, cream-colored parchment and bore the gold-embossed seal of the State Regulatory Commission. It was a formal commendation. The board recognizes your instrumental role in dismantling a cross-jurisdictional extortion and wire fraud operation. Holden read, summarizing the elegant text. You mapped a criminal syndicate from the inside out. You handed us a flawless prosecution file. We do not usually issue commendations to private sector auditors. We made an exception. I traced the gold seal with my index finger. My parents had weaponized this exact agency to orchestrate my professional execution. They designed this bureaucracy to be my graveyard. Instead, it became the forge that hardened my career into something untouchable. Thank you, Investigator Holden, I said, sliding the commendation into my leather briefcase. The cleanup of the Richard family required no further intervention on my part. I let gravity do the work. The first domino fell in Massachusetts. 3 days after the Bellagio Gala, my personal cell phone illuminated with a Boston area code. I sat at my new desk in the Bellagio Compliance Division, watching the incoming call screen. The caller identification displayed my brother's name. I did not press the green icon. I let the digital ringing echo in the quiet office until it routed to the automated answering service. 5 minutes later, an audio file appeared in my inbox. I put on my noise-canceling headphones and pressed play. Blake sounded like a man drowning in a shallow pool. His voice was frantic, stripped of the arrogant golden child veneer he had worn his entire life. "Verity, you have to pick up," Blake begged into the receiver. The hospital administration pulled me out of rounds this morning. Someone tipped them off about the secondary collectors. The underground bookies showed up in the lobby of the surgical wing looking for me. The residency director suspended my credentials pending an ethical review. I cannot access the apartment. My keycard is deactivated. Mom and Dad are not answering their phones. You have to call me back. I have nowhere to go. The recording clicked silent. He was searching for his human shield. He expected me to absorb the impact of his reckless choices, just as our parents had trained me to do since childhood. He wanted me to wire funds, negotiate with the collectors, and beg the hospital board for leniency. He wanted the sister who always fixed the deficits. I dragged the audio file to the digital trash bin and clicked empty. I closed the application. Blake was finally experiencing the uninsulated reality of his own actions. Cut off from my resources and stripped of the stolen equity our parents used to prop him up, he was left to face the underground syndicates alone. The golden child illusion burned away, leaving only ash. The architects of the fraud faced a much steeper cliff. 3 months later, I sat in the back row of a sterile municipal courtroom in Clark County. The polished wood and high ceilings offered a stark contrast to the neon chaos of the strip outside. Aunt Denise sat beside me. She wore a tailored navy suit projecting the calm authority of a seasoned executive. We did not speak. We merely watched the scales balance. My mother and father did not look like the aspiring socialites who had paraded through the Bellagio ballroom. The county-issued jumpsuits hung loosely on their frames. My father stared at his scuffed canvas shoes. His posture was hollow. My mother kept her head bowed, her graying hair lacking the expensive salon treatments she used to demand. The Wentworth estate attorneys had moved with lethal speed in the civil courts. Victoria Wentworth kept her promise. Her lawyers filed immediate liens against the Richard suburban property to recover the stolen home equity funds. They froze my parents' checking accounts and seized their vehicles. Stripped of their stolen liquidity, Diane and Thomas could not afford private defense counsel. They relied on an overworked public defender who urged them to accept a plea deal to avoid a protracted federal trial. The judge adjusted his reading glasses and looked down from the elevated bench. He read the charges aloud. First-degree bank fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit extortion across state lines. The list of felonies echoed in the quiet room. The sentence was delivered without fanfare. 8 years in the Nevada State Penitentiary. I scanned the gallery behind the defense table. It was empty. The country club friends, the neighbors, the ambitious acquaintances my mother had spent decades cultivating were nowhere to be found. Her social currency evaporated the second the handcuffs clicked shut. In both Las Vegas and East Coast circles, the Richard name was synonymous with toxic scandal. The reputation she had valued above her own daughter was annihilated. A pair of bailiffs escorted them toward the side door leading to the holding cells. My mother paused. She turned her head, searching the gallery, until she found me. She did not look angry. She looked empty. I held her gaze, offering no smile and no frown. I simply watched the state remove her from the board. The heavy wooden door closed. The ledger was balanced. 1 year later, the desert wind sweeping across the Las Vegas Valley carried the faint electric hum of the city. I stood on the wraparound terrace of our new penthouse. The glass railing offered an unobstructed view of the Strip, a glittering artery of regulated capital flowing through the dark. The air was cool, smelling of ozone and distant rain. Connor stepped through the sliding glass doors. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He handed me a crystal flute filled with sparkling water. I accepted the glass, my fingers brushing against his. A platinum wedding band rested on my left hand, catching the ambient light from the city below. Aunt Denise is downstairs in the lobby, Connor announced, leaning against the glass partition. She secured the final regulatory approvals for the Venetian expansion project. She wants to toast the new quarter. I smiled, taking a sip of the cold water. Tell her to come up. We have our own numbers to celebrate. I touched the lapel of my tailored blazer. A gold badge rested against the dark fabric. It was not a standard corporate credential. I no longer audited ledgers for a single casino. I was the lead investigator for the Nevada Gaming Control Board Enforcement Division. The state had recognized my distinct talent for tracking shadow money and dismantling corrupt hierarchies. They handed me a division of my own. I now possess the statutory authority to freeze assets, strip licenses, and enforce compliance across the entire jurisdiction. Connor wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close. He looked out at the glowing skyline, his East Coast pragmatism blending seamlessly with the neon desert. We built a formidable enterprise, Verity. We removed the liabilities, I corrected softly. I looked down at the city. Millions of dollars were changing hands every second. Fortunes were being built and lost on the green felt tables below. My parents had tried to use this environment to bury me. They believed that noise manipulation and theatrical grief could override hard evidence. They thought survival required shouting the loudest narrative. They were wrong. The most profound retribution does not require raising your voice. It does not demand public screaming matches or emotional displays. True power is cold. It lives in the quiet preservation of documents. It thrives in the meticulous indexing of routing numbers, digital timestamps, and encrypted audio files. The ultimate systemic triumph belongs to the one who holds the pen. You do not need to burn the enemy down. You only need to keep the receipts. Step back and let the guilty audit themselves into oblivion. The American family is often idealized as a sacred sanctuary, a pristine fortress of unconditional love, traditional values, and unwavering support. We are conditioned from birth to revere the institution of blood ties, trusting that the dining room table will forever remain a place of safety and moral guidance. Yet as we trace the shattered remnants of Verity Richards' story, a much darker, unspoken reality emerges from the shadows of suburban prestige. We witness the catastrophic damage inflicted when parents swap their internal moral compass for an external balance sheet, trading their fundamental duty of care for fleeting social currency. This narrative is not merely a tale of extortion or a procedural thriller. It is a profound mirror held up to the fractured soul of modern familial education. It forces us to examine the dangerous illusions we sustain to protect the appearance of the perfect American household. For parents navigating the fiercely competitive landscape of American culture, the descent of Diane and Thomas serves as a chilling, urgent, cautionary tale. In a society that frequently equates a child's external success, an elite medical residency, a wealthy East Coast marriage, with ultimate parental triumph, the true essence of family responsibility is easily corrupted. Traditional family values are not preserved by hiding a child's failures, nor are they honored by leveraging one child's stability to fund another's ruin. Genuine fairness and emotional awareness require parents to enforce accountability, even when it threatens their curated public image. When parents insulate a favored child from the gravity of their own destructive choices, they do not offer love, they construct a cage of permanent immaturity. Raising children demands the profound courage to let them fall and experience the weight of their own actions. The highest duty of a mother or father is not to shield their offspring from the world, but to equip them with the moral spine to walk through it honestly. A family built on blatant favoritism and quiet financial exploitation is merely a corporation operating under a false name, destined for inevitable bankruptcy. To the young adults forging their paths in today's hyper-demanding economy, Verity's journey offers a stark, empowering revelation. Society conditions the young to equate silent obedience with respect, teaching them that familial love is a lingering debt that must be infinitely repaid. Verity's ordeal teaches us that true independence requires the arduous task of auditing our own emotional ledgers. You are not a human shield for your siblings. You are not an emergency fund for the architects of your childhood. The highest form of self-respect is recognizing when the individuals who gave you life are actively attempting to dismantle it. Forging your own path requires fierce, unyielding resilience. It demands the strength to look at the people you love, recognize their toxic architecture, and step out of the collapsing building before the roof caves in. Establishing boundaries is not an act of betrayal. It is a fundamental act of survival. Looking at this tragedy through the lens of a spiritual seeker, one who pursues inner cultivation and clarity, we observe the tragic consequences of a society drowning in material illusion. We live in an era where prestige is worshipped as a deity and integrity is treated as a disposable commodity. The spiritual path teaches us that profound human suffering stems from this exact attachment to false idols, the desperate, suffocating, clinging to status, wealth, and societal approval. Diane and Thomas destroyed themselves because they lacked the vision to see that a reputation bought with deceit is inherently hollow. To navigate this complex modern reality and achieve a genuinely fulfilling life, one must cultivate three essential pillars of existence: wisdom, morality, and willpower. Wisdom is the ability to see things exactly as they are, stripping away the emotional titles of mother or brother to observe the objective truth of their actions, just as Verity did with her forensic audit. It is the clarity to recognize manipulation dressed as affection. Morality is the unwavering commitment to truth and fairness, refusing to sign a forged confession or participate in a lie, even when the societal pressure is suffocating. Willpower, the ultimate inner resilience, is the quiet fortitude required to walk away from a corrupted sanctuary, endure the pain of severing toxic roots, and build a clean, solitary foundation. Cultivating the self means understanding that true wealth is a peaceful, unburdened conscience, and true poverty is a soul permanently mortgaged to maintain a lie. These quiet betrayals happen every single day, behind drawn blinds and manicured lawns across the country. If this exploration of family boundaries and the quiet courage required to seek the truth resonates with your own unspoken experiences, I invite you to subscribe to Morning Revenge. Join us as we continue to untangle the complex webs of human nature, shining a light on the hidden stories that force us to look inward and rebuild. We are relentlessly conditioned to believe that forgiveness is the ultimate virtue, that walking away from our bloodline is an unforgivable sin. But perhaps this conventional narrative is entirely backward. Perhaps the highest manifestation of love is not endless suffering sacrifice, but the swift, uncompromising delivery of justice. By stepping aside and allowing her parents to face the cold machinery of the law, Verity did not destroy her family. She honored the universal law of consequence. She afforded them the raw dignity of reaping exactly what they sowed. Sometimes the only way to heal a diseased lineage is to become the sharp blade that severs it. Blood merely makes you related, but loyalty, honesty, and shared truth make you a family. When the ledger of unconditional love is revealed to be a carefully drafted ransom note, the most ethical choice is simply to close the account. We spend our entire lives searching for a sanctuary in other people, only to discover that true salvation is the unassailable fortress of our own integrity.